What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. It's Friday. I'm actually super excited that it's Friday because, like most of us that work Monday through Friday jobs, Fridays, like no matter how bad of a day you have, you're excited because you know you have the weekend off. So it's like I feel like I'm in the right state of mind to do like Friday podcast. So it's cool. And I have Robbie Martin's back, musician, activist, filmmaker. He did American Anthrax, which hits on a really important topic because I think it was one of those stories that people kind of forgot about after September 11th, just like how they were just scaring everybody with the anthrax. And I think it was just it was a part of a bigger picture of like scaring people and convince people that, hey, we have to do something because we're all, everything's a threat and we're scared shitless. But so I think that was important. And that's on YouTube. Check it out. You can just search it and you'll find it. And obviously his sister, Abby Martin's from Breaking the Set, which most people should know who listen to the show. And do you ever get to, it's so weird because I wonder, I'm like, do you ever get sick of like always like people linking you to Abby, like, oh, you're Abby's brother, you're Abby, it's like, it's almost like, obviously, if I have like somebody who's like successful in the family and people are always kind of linking me to them, do you ever feel like that's I'm always like, dude, should I even mention Abby, or is that like, I don't want to be that like a-hole who's like, dude, I'm my own dude, I don't need to, or is it like,
yeah, I think under different circumstances it might actually irritate me, but it's like her and I are such a team, politically speaking. We do such similar work that that is kind of like conjoined at the hip. So like ideologically we're sort of like Siamese twins, so it's not really an issue for me. I mean it has its benefits, of course, too. I mean, like I'll get reactions from people where they think I'm sort of on the top of this totem pole just because I'm brothers with Abby, which kind of amuses me because I honestly don't really link up with that many people face to face or even online. Like, you're one of the only like handful of people that I do these kind of podcasts with. So
thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it funny that people imagine me to be sort of like, I guess like a quasi celebrity because I'm her brother, but it's not really true. I'm just a normal guy.
Yeah.
And so is and Abby's a normal girl when you actually meet her.
Yeah, well,
very down to her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a cool thing about like it's weird when you see people on TV or like the only time you've never met them and the only time you really see them is on TV, because we do put people on this pedestal, like we assume they're different than us because they're on TV. And like I've met a lot of people from doing this podcast and like going to shows and concerts, and I've talked to musicians, and it was just like it was cool because when you like break through that and you realize like, holy shit, they're just dudes doing things they love, like I do things I love. And just like if you broke through and became this huge celebrity, or if I broke through and became this huge celebrity, people would look at us the same way until they met us and realize, oh, they're just regular dudes. Unless of course the money got to our head and we turned into like a Bieber who's going around doing fucking donuts and Ferraris, which could happen because I've never had that much money. So I can't say that I wouldn't go a little crazy, but there is something to that about having that much money, how it makes you a little bit, it's just it's crazy because this is a little off topic, but the thing about having that much money that you're always like, I always tell like my friends and I'm always like, dude, if we were billionaires, like a lot of these like corporate, just evil people that we talk about quite often, like the last thing I would do is be going from business meeting to business meeting to, just traveling the world, doing all this, doing all this work. Basically, I'd be fucking sitting back, enjoying life, like just basically, smoking cigars, drinking whiskey, reading a good book, hanging out with my friends, enjoying company, listening to music. And like the fact that these guys are like motivated when they have enough money to support themselves, support their kids, their grandkids, their great grandkids, and then they're still motivated. Like, to me, that's addiction. That's and it's funny how, and I've said this on the show in the past, where like addiction is always looked at a certain way, counting on what they're addicted to. It's like if they're addicted to alcohol, then it's then it's one thing. If you're addicted to money, it's like completely socially acceptable. Then, well, a lot of times I think that most of these guys that are really, it's never enough type of attitude, I think those guys are usually, unfortunately, like successful because they have that cutthroat attitude, and their goal is always make more money. It's never like, being liked, or because I mean I kind of live in the corporate world. We have like a small family construction company, and I deal with a lot of the successful companies we do sub work for and stuff like that. You meet these owners and they are the biggest a-holes, and you're just like, this is why you're successful, because you don't care about who you step on, who you piss off. Being liked is on the last thing on your list of like things, your priorities, and I think it's a different type of mindset. And it's funny because I just heard your sister on the Pointless podcast with Kevin Pereira, and it was one of the first podcasts of his that I listened to because Abby was on there, and Kevin actually ended up being a really funny dude. He's actually it seems like a really cool dude, so I'm glad I listened to that. But she was talking about how all the drugs that you did and made her do, I wouldn't say made her, but like exposed her to when you guys were younger, and then it made me wonder, because I was listening to that and I was thinking, I'm like, I wonder if that's why Abby and Robbie are like, these very open-minded people, because you always hear like on other podcasts we're fans of, like Joe Rogan's and stuff like that, and just people talk about how these psychedelics and these drugs can help expand our mind and help see things from a different point of view. And then I relate that and link that to like Vietnam and who was protesting. It was the people who were doing LSD and the hippies and the people who were saying no. So it was like, I wonder if it was harder to program them or basically turn them into sheep that are following the herd when you're doing these psychedelics and stuff like that. And do you think that had some, I don't even know where I was going with all that or how I even got here, but I know.
Yeah, I'm following.
Yeah, I think the question is, do you think that had some effect on you guys? Like, you think, experimenting with psychedelics and different things like that?
Oh, I mean, of course it had an effect. And I think that when I first got into psychedelic culture, when I first started reading a lot about it, like McKenna and Shulgin and stuff like that, I sort of idealized the world of psychedelics as being this catalyzing, that psychedelics can cause in and of themselves a catalyzing consciousness shift in the masses, that if enough people started taking psychedelics at once, that just automatically, the paradigm would be reset enough where we would have some form of some kind of like evolution. I don't know if I don't quite have the same faith in humanity as I did back then, in terms of just, things organically happening like that. But what's really interesting to me, though, you mentioned the 60s and the Vietnam War protests. I mean, those were definitely intrinsically linked, that there was sort of this psychedelic explosion, sexual revolution happening around the same time as, the draft. I think that the timing of that was very important. So you had the draft, which we haven't had since Vietnam, which caused a lot of regular people who didn't want to fight in war to get really pissed off and protest. We had an explosion of drugs. Nixon made all the psychedelics and stuff illegal. But I don't know, like nowadays it's this weird, we have this weird thing happening where there is sort of a psychedelic revolution happening, but it's happening underground. But I mean, there are like things that crop up in the mainstream. I mean, like I just, you'll notice more like psychedelic drug references in comedy, for example, is one small example of how we're sort of inching forward into like, psychedelics becoming more accepted. CNN just had, I think Sanjay Gupta, the doctor on CNN, just had like a guy from MAPS, the psychedelic research group on, and I mean that's a huge deal. I mean, I think it's a really big milestone for sort of bringing that more into the open. But back to your original question, did it affect us? Absolutely. Would we have still been into the same politics and stuff that we are into now had it not been for psychedelics? I think it's hard to say, but I don't think that we were like, sheltered and closed-minded before we did psychedelics. It was sort of like psychedelics enabled us. We were already like open-minded sort of before that point. So it's really hard to say, but I mean, it definitely aided and helped me. But interestingly, I haven't really tripped on acid or taken like a really serious dose of psychedelics since before I got into politics. So that's another weird thing. Like I haven't really had a chance to reflect on all these political thoughts that I have while on psychedelics yet. I've taken like salvia and small doses of DMT, but I don't really. That to me is not the same as like a long-term, day-long introspective sort of reality-shattering trip kind of experience.
You ever have a bad trip?
Oh yeah. Back in the day, yeah, for sure.
That's like yeah.
I was just because I got to the point where I wanted to do every single psychedelic drug, like every category, every genre of psychedelic drug. So I ended up trying pretty much everything. Dissociatives like ketamine, DMT, tryptamines like LSD, unclassifiable ones like salvia. But yeah, I've had my fair share of bad trips, and then I started like doing psychedelics in combination with each other. I had some really good trips from that, but also some not so good ones.
Holy shit, man! You did not fuck around, huh?
No.
Dude, but the weird thing is that all the positive things, like you were talking about, the guys from Maps. I forget his name too, and actually Christopher Ryan was one of the ones who tweeted it, because he's like, I would never think that one of my buddies I'd ever see him on CNN with Dr. Sanjay Gupta talking about the benefits of psychedelics, and then I remember watching a clip, and they were talking about these, and it's awesome, like you said, a mainstream media like CNN, a mainstream doctor like Sanjay Gupta, like to finally like be open minded to the idea that there's some benefits. But it's crazy, the benefits. Like I forget, I don't know if it was ecstasy or which is MDMA or whatever, that they were giving like addicts, and like after like 2 or 3 sessions they were completely not addicted to like alcohol or whatever it was, and then obviously for like post-war trauma, like I think I don't know if it's ecstasy or what it is, LSD or whatever, but I know some of these psychedelics can help with that. So there's like a lot of positive effects that have probably we haven't reached or understood the benefits of, because of the fact that obviously the government, there's war on drugs with the Nixon times, and since then we've been very close-minded to even researching it, because that's the crazy thing, is like it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to give them out to kids, but it's just like at least research, at least let people who to see if there's some benefits, and if it can help people. I mean, you look at it, the scariest thing is being a victim inside your own brain. And that's like, I always look at people who come from war, and it always like, it sucks that you can't help them when they, do have some type of, mental trauma, because they are like just in prison in their head. They're trapped in their own head, and there's not much you can do. So the fact that there's some benefits in these drugs, and that could help these people who obviously in most cases put their lives on the line, and sometimes their sanity on the line for an unjust cause, and there's shit out there that could help them. Like, the fact that we're not researching that is crazy, and I couldn't even imagine being in that state where you can't run. I mean, it's at least, I wouldn't say at least, because obviously a physical disability is very bad too, but a mental disability, it's like, in some sense, it almost seems scarier or worse, like the idea that, at least if you're sane and you lost a leg or lost an arm, you could still manage to do something and enjoy life and stuff like that. And a lot of these guys do. I mean, I think it's heroic, the fact that, and it makes us, like, at least makes me feel selfish when I see somebody who's going through some real shit and still can smile, and then the rest of us are, or at least most of us are materialistic and stressing about stupid stuff, when like there's people out there who are going through, who I walked by. I was at work and I was walking by this car, and I saw this guy, getting off a wheelchair and hopping in his car. And I'm just like thinking to myself, I'm like, holy shit, the struggle of just doing something as simple as hopping in your car, or who knows, anything. Like, when we get injured, it reminds us how lucky we are that we're even functional mentally and physically every day, and there's people out there who have struggles to do the simplest tasks. So, it definitely hits a soft spot in my heart for people who have any type of disability, mental or physical, and the fact that there's opportunity of finding something that could help, and that's being suppressed because of stupid laws that make no sense. Then I think that really rubs me the wrong way. And same thing with Dr. Sanjay Gupta's first documentary, Weed, when he had that little girl who had she was shaking, and I don't know if it was some type of Tourette's or some nerve issue, and the fact that this type of cannabis could help her, and they couldn't get it in their own state. So this little girl has to struggle and live in pain, all because of this outdated fucking, cannabis law is fucking insane to me. Like, it just, I don't know. It makes me mad even talking about it. But it just, I definitely think that, these benefits are there, and we should look into that. So any thoughts on that after my 10-hour rant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've thought about this often, that, it's kind of bullshit that we still have to have this idea of like medical marijuana in California, and that's the sort of quasi legal open door, for people to recreationally use it. I think it's unfortunate that we have to use a loophole like that instead of being fully legal. But on the other hand, if you think about a state like Colorado, if the federal government allowed it, corporations would enter the weed market, and it would be something unprecedented that we've never seen before. I mean, I'm generally anti-corporation. So when I think about the possibilities of, say, if like the taboo of marijuana and psychedelics were eventually lifted like 20, 30 years from now in this country, and the federal government repealed the ban on them, it would be like a whole new corporate drug bonanza that we've never seen before. And that kind of scares me, actually. So in some ways there is some benefit to like these things being like weed being like quasi legal, because it still staves off some of that of what I'm imagining. And then, the taboo of psychedelics being lifted eventually, it could be used for bad things by corporations. So I don't think it would be all good if that was lifted. It could, because they will find ways to capitalize on it and do things with it. And what's great about like Alexander Shulgin releasing his book P-Call and T-Call is he basically released like open source, hundreds of analogs of all these existing psychedelic drugs, open source with recipes for free, essentially to the whole world. So
recipes for psychedelics?
Yeah. Like his books are, half of them are a personalized story co-written by his wife about sort of their experiences with psychedelics in their lives. And then the other half of the books, there's two different books. One of them is based on tryptamines, which is like LSD, psilocybin, DMT. The other one is based on phenethylamines like MDMA, mescaline. And what he does is he was the guy who discovered the psychedelic properties of MDMA. He didn't actually discover MDMA as a drug. It was like patented in like the 1920s, I think, by a German pharmaceutical company. But no one discovered its sort of empathic properties until he started experimenting with it. And he was actually a DEA scientist who learned all this chemistry from other things. And then when he left the DEA, he started to basically invent new drugs by taking all these existing psychedelics and breaking down their components and adding new components and new, changing the molecules around slightly. And he literally invented like 100 new drugs in each book. And by doing this, imagine if it was someone else who did this and then just sold all that information privately to a bunch of pharmaceutical companies and then made millions of dollars off of it. Instead of that, he decided to release them as like open source knowledge for the public. And I think that that's what needs to be done. Like more sort of, it's almost in a similar way to what Aaron Swartz was going to do with the like academic journals, free information for the masses. But it was more than that, because it was like he was inventing new drugs and just saying, here's the recipe, try to make these. Here's what I found out when I gave them out to my group of friends, and here's what they had to say about them. So it's kind of like renegade, quasi-anarchist science kind of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, he recently passed away, so we don't really have anyone currently, working like that, or at least out in the open. But I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about psychedelics. That could be a discussion for a whole nother show. I mean, we could go on about that for hours, but
yeah, I think it's super intriguing. And the crazy thing is that people like me who, like, I haven't done any psychedelics besides a POC cookie once. And I fucked that up big time, because one, even though I've heard so much conversation about it, I should have never watched anything that was super stimulating. And I like got this pot cookie, completely forgot about it. I was in the middle of watching Wolf of Wall Street, and I thought about eating it, and it was the worst thing. It was such a bad idea, because I'm guessing like when you did yours, a lot of times were you like in a quiet place or somewhere that you weren't super stimulated, like, because that was probably where I fucked up, right? Was to watching a movie that's already psychedelic if you're sober, with all the weird scenes and stuff like that, and then to be tripping my balls off, like it was weird. I just, let's just say I wasn't sure if I was liking it or whatnot, but that was probably my first mistake.
Well, let me just say this from a psychedelic veteran who's done hundreds of psychedelic experiences. Pot cookies are nothing to fuck around with. I mean, like, they can be seriously fucking intense. Some of my most unpleasant psychedelic experiences have been on pot food. So
a lot of people have said that. I've talked to a lot of people about it, and they're like, dude, I'm not sure I like orals, eating marijuana. And I'm like, wait, you don't like eating weed? I'm like, so I don't get it. Like, there's all these other people who have like great experiences that I hear on like shows and stuff like that. I mean, Joey Diaz, like Rogan was talking about the other day, how he just eats them daily, like it's nothing. I'm like, gee, I'm like, what the is he constantly just tripping balls? I'm like, it's like,
I think his tolerance is probably just huge, and also his body weight. I mean, he's a big guy.
Yeah,
probably. I mean, the thing with pot food is that it absorbs. I noticed that it's for different people. It absorbs in their body much differently. Like, it'll come on stronger for different people who've taken the same amount as you have, or it comes on really slow for some people. Like, sometimes people won't feel it for like 2 or 3 hours. And also another factor I think that plays into it is THC is like weed these days is hyper engineered to be extremely high THC. And when, back in the day when people would grow weed, they wouldn't hyper engineer it for like optimal THC yields. They would harvest it more normally, more traditionally. So when you let weed, when like the pre, like, 50 years ago, let's say, when people were harvesting weed, they would let it mature longer. And when you would do that, it would lower the THC yield slightly, but other chemicals like CBD would be more present as well. But nowadays it seems like weed is just almost all THC, and like other components that add to the psychoactive effects like CBD are less prevalent in the weed. But they've actually done scientific studies. You may have actually seen this, that in the UK, they would inject people intravenously with THC by itself, and a lot of the people would report terrifying, anxiety-ridden, paranoid, horrible, uncomfortable experiences. But when the doctors would inject the same amount of THC, but then also inject additional intravenous injection of CBD, the people's reaction was like the exact opposite, like giggly,
really,
super happy, laughing, like sort of like the type of high you see when people are like being really silly in movies or TV shows or whatever, like the generic,
giggly, and everything's funny,
yeah. So like, I mean, I think that plays a very important role in like actually enjoying what marijuana is supposed to do to you. But we've gotten to the point where it's like, it's just all about the strongest THC. And I think, I mean, for myself, I've actually started buying these CBD only edibles at some of these cannabis dispensaries. And when you eat a little bit of that and smoke like really strong weed on top of it, it actually makes the high more pleasant. It makes it feel more, more body, I don't know, more of like a less of a head, paranoid high, and more of like a body relaxing sort of feel. So I don't know. I mean, pot food is not for me, generally speaking.
Yeah, so they might be fucking things up by kind of focusing on one thing without the other, huh? You think that it's messing up people's experiences with it, because probably naturally you probably need both, and because now they're kind of breeding them for certain things, right? Which maybe is making an unnatural amount of one thing over the other, maybe. Yeah,
I mean, I had this idea like many years ago, where before like vapor pens and e-cigarettes became a thing, of this idea of like sort of like a pure chemical weed dispenser, which would just have like the bare essential components of what gets you high in marijuana, and then like a computer would actually calculate the amounts of each chemical according to what kind of high that you want. So like it would put more CBD in or something like that. I mean, yeah, it just seems like it's really all about THC, THC yield, and that's what everybody seems to be focusing on. And yeah, they do have CBD strength weed and edibles now, and that's a relatively new thing. But I think that's the future of pot science is going to be about the combination and the ratios, and how to dial those in like perfectly for your body type or body chemistry.
Yeah. You ever look into any of that links to with like mushrooms and stuff? And what was it? The cross and the sacred mushroom or something like that. Well, when they think that a lot of the Bible, a lot of the things that they were seeing or experiencing were basically just doing psychedelics unknowingly.
I mean, that opens up a whole. I mean, there's so many different writers and people who have theorized about the origins of different religions and drugs. I mean, even Hinduism. Some of the earliest Hindu writings available refer constantly to a drug named soma that historians have tried for hundreds of years to try to figure out what drug they were actually talking about. Some historians and scientists have come to the conclusion that it was, I think it's pronounced bang. It was like an traditional Indian drink where it was milk and marijuana. So it's like a edible milk. It's basically like a marijuana milk chai kind of thing that you would drink like a soup. You would drink large bowls of it. But I don't know, like, I know John Irving has written a lot about that. I find him just not credible for other reasons than his drug writing. So I haven't really
Isn't
looked
he
into
the dude who gave Rogan his first DMT trip, then was super pro DMT, and then became because you ever listen to the Higher Side Chats with
No.
Greg Carlwood? It's basically just it's a podcast with Greg Carlwood and a really cool host. He's been on my show, really nice guy, and he does a show just on basic conspiracy theories, and some of them are very credible people. Like they talk about Bilderberg, but sometimes he has fun and he has people who are just theories like the just reptilians, all types of crazy shit, and the hollow earth theory. That's what I was trying to come up with, the hollow earth theory and stuff like that, and stuff that I don't, I think that obviously if he was like a news podcast, or not news, but he was alternative news and trying to sell this to people, then I'd have a problem with it. But he completely does it as fun, and he doesn't, he has people on, and it's fun conversation. It's fun to see the links between history, because a lot of these conspiracy theories, which I hate that term. I think we all do, everybody in this kind of who has the same mindset as us, but it's just unfortunate. It's just an easy term to use. But a lot of these conspiracy theories, they are linked to a lot of events that did happen and people that were real. So it's just like you actually do learn a little bit about history sometimes and past events as you dig into these stories and stuff like that. So I find that intriguing. But anyways, to get back to what you're saying, Irvin was on his show recently, like a couple weeks ago, and he was like super rude to Greg Carlwood, and Greg was just talking about McKenna and kind of like talking about how McKenna to him was a huge inspiration.
Oh no! That's a sore spot now. I didn't see his appearance on Rogan, but I was following him on Facebook for a while, and he went off on this crazy quest to out every single figure in the psychedelic movement as a CIA agent, basically.
Yeah. Because I got
I mean, I get that people want to do that kind of research, and I think asking the question is perfectly fine and just putting it out there, but like, it kind of almost turns into like a form of snitch jacketing in a way, especially because a lot of these people he's going after are dead now. So it's like, I mean,
well, he's calling Dennis McKenna also like a CIA, FBI. I mean, it's insanity. So he had him on, and then Greg on Twitter just mentioned the show, because he wasn't like super happy with the show, because he felt like people weren't going to enjoy it, because he kept talking over him, and he just kept questioning his McKenna basically opinion, and he was just like, just going irate saying he has the documents and it's proven and you're not intelligent if you think otherwise and all this stuff and so then I went back and watched his show when he was on Rogan's like way back in the day and like early in the show, and he was like a complete different dude. He still interrupted people. That was one thing that like I commented on him. I told him how I'm like he definitely has no social skills because he does not. He just constantly would just talk over people. And then when I watched that Joe Rogan episode, he was doing that even back then. He was just constantly didn't know when to let somebody finish their thought, and just constantly like butting in, and which almost made it that much easier for me to dislike him. And so then we get in like this little Twitter argument, which is funny because one thing I love about you on Twitter is that you are not afraid to speak your mind with anybody, which I love. I think that's awesome. That it's like your opinions are out there, and if somebody says something you don't agree with, you don't hold back and you go out there and you say it. And like I said, I think that's awesome. So me and Irvin or whatever his name is, like got at it. I'm not trying to be a jerk by saying whatever his name. I really just don't know how to pronounce his name. And me and him got at it, and then. So it was weird. So I did some research on this because it was kind of weird that this guy was the first person to give Rogan DMT, who became this person who sparked like opened many minds to DMT. And now like is one of those people who are really promoting the idea of psychedelics, helping people self-reflect, and he was in the Union, the business behind getting high, and he was in, and he all these things, and so. Now this guy's doing a complete 360 and calling everybody a CIA agent and this and that, and it's just like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? And he's one of those people that makes me wonder, because it's like, wait, he did all these DMT trips, he did all these psychedelics, so obviously psychedelics, not for everybody, helps you self-reflect and see things not clear, but with an open mind, because he obviously has made up his mind, he has this figured out, and now there's no turning back. But I wonder if maybe he did so many psychedelic trips that now he's just a fucking lunatic, because there's some of the things he says, like, and other things when it comes down to like mind control and the way like media uses techniques, and when he talks about like a lot of other things, because I think he's linked with Richard Grove and Tragedy and Hope, and he either does some work for him or whatever, and Richard Grove does a lot of good stuff, and so it was just like, it was weird that they're all linked together, and I'm just like, really? I'm like, so I just wonder if it's just one issue that he maybe might make a lot of sense with a bunch of other stuff, because he did when he was on the original podcast with Rogan. It was actually an interesting show, and he, besides the fact he kept interrupting everybody, it was he made some good points about stuff, and he seemed like an all right dude, and then all of a sudden he did this full 360, and I just think that like when your evidence is so thin, like, I mean, his biggest point was some old speech by Terrence about, he said something, I don't remember what his exact line was, but it was something that could have easily been interpreted in 1,000 different ways, and that's like some of his best evidence. And I'm just like, really? I'm like, this is what you're focusing your effort and energy on? I'm like, there's so many real issues out there, and sometimes when people go overboard with like one thing that's kind of, I mean, can be questionable, to me it just seems like a waste of energy and time, So do you know anything about him or any of his craziness?
I do, but I don't even think he really deserves.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The amount of time we've talked about already. But
well, you know what is? This was kind of new to me, so that's why some people might have already known. You might have already known about his work, but to me, like, I just heard about him when he was on that podcast. So I'm like, how have I never heard of this dude? And then when I heard that he gave Rogan his first DMT trip, I'm like, what? I'm like, who? I'm like, so, and then that's when it kind of got interesting for me, just to kind of look into that. So, but you're right. I probably already gave him way too much time.
Well, I mean, I think this is a perfect segue to go into 9/11, because like you just mentioned, you stole the words out of my mouth, that he came in, he made all these connections, he's linked to all these, credible people in the psychedelic movement, and then just suddenly, just all of a sudden started snitch jacketing all these old, figures, or even current figures in the movement, in the psychedelic movement. And it reminds me an awful lot of certain people who have come into the 9/11 movement, gained some sort of status or authority, and then all of a sudden started snitch jacketing people or saying absolutely batshit crazy stuff that just, in some ways, damages the movement as a whole. Because once they insert themselves and build enough bridges to other people who are credible or whatnot, and then it's sort of almost like dropping a bomb in the middle of a crowded shopping mall or something, like just just boom, then like the ripple effects
Thanks.
will spread to many corners of the movement, and then forever people can go back and say, look at this, this is a crazy authority figure in the 9/11 movement at one time, and he's a hologram, no planar space beam guy. What do you have to say about that? So it's kind of creates in some ways irreparable damage to the movement as a whole. So I don't know. I mean, I wanted to mention really quickly though, you were talking about this idea of like drugs being behind religions. There's a really good book that's not out yet, but several chapters of it are out online by an old friend of mine named Mike Crowley, who wrote a book called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism. And he's still finishing it right now, but the theory is that Tibetan Buddhism was heavily inspired by mushrooms. And he also links it to Hinduism as well, like psilocybin mushrooms. And even before the New Testament, I know there's a lot of stuff about like Jesus being a mushroom, but what's most interesting to me is like the very, some of the earliest stories in the Old Testament about the burning bush. I don't know. I mean, was that pot? I mean, maybe it was pot, but the things that Abraham said, or if he really did or said any of those things, seemed like he was on something a lot more fucking crazy and psychotic than pot. I mean, my mind almost goes to places like poisonous or toxic, what they call deliriants, that are not necessarily psychedelics, but they make you hallucinate from your health failing, like drugs like datura or atropa belladonna, these poisonous but also very common plants that are found in thousands of different species, or the chemicals from these plants, scopolamine and atropine, can give you realistic, delusional, schizophrenic style hallucinations. And I mean, it's possible that the Bible is based on, some dude inhaling a datura bush that was on fire. I don't know.
Well, even fasting, like they did a lot of fasting, which if people say if you don't eat for long enough, I mean, you obviously will. I guess living in the Western world, we are lucky that we can kind of eat whenever we want. But if anybody's ever had the experience where they're haven't ate for a really long period of time, you can do some hallucinating, and they did a lot. I know people, a lot of, it was a religious thing where people would do fasting and stuff like that. So that could, like you said, that's another kind of I guess, not to use the word natural, because I don't know what natural or unnatural is, but that's kind of a natural way of hallucinating, and without using any psychedelics. So who knows what caused it? There could be a lot of things. And it's funny because the recent beheading things reminded me of you recently, because obviously you did that famous beheading video with your buddy that got some attention. And the recent ones, you think, obviously there's some conversation about it being fake and whatnot. I don't know if it is or isn't. I haven't done enough research on it. But from somebody who has done one, what do you think?
So when they first happened, I was just like, whoa, this is really bizarre. This is weird. Why doesn't it actually show? I don't know if you already know this, but it doesn't actually show the actual beheadings.
Yeah, because I was looking for it. I'm like, am I not finding the legit video, or do they just not actually show it?
No, they don't show it. And so, part of me was thinking, well, maybe ISIS made these videos and, just it's too inconvenient to actually show someone being beheaded. It just takes too long or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. But I've come to the conclusion that even if these videos are completely legit, completely made by ISIS, the most suspicious thing to me about them is the timing in which they were released. And there is this company, and I forget the name of them now, but you can look it up. I think Paul Joseph Watson has done some research on this. He did some years and years ago when there was beheading videos coming out during the Iraq War, that there is some sort of intermediary press network company that will find these videos on the internet from their original source. They will take them, they will timestamp them, and then release them to the press themselves. And I find that very peculiar, because in this day and age of the internet and everybody being so hyper-connected, you would expect that the video that we're seeing would have come directly from ISIS itself. You know, like they would have just put it on a social network or a message board or whatever, and then that would be the video that we're watching. But apparently that's not the case. Apparently every single one of the bin Laden videos and most of these beheading videos are released by some sort of intermediary press PR group that's like releases a lot of military videos and stuff. So I think that I personally think that that's the key. It's that the timing of this release. Maybe these videos are real. Maybe they were made a month ago. Maybe they were made recently. I don't know. But it's awfully suspicious to me that they were both released consecutively, like within days of each other, and then just all of a sudden we have this, you know, seemingly valid reason now to go into Syria. I mean, it's too convenient. It really is. I mean, the Nick Berg beheading video as well was released. You know, the press tried to say that it was released as reaction to the Abu Ghraib torture photos. Like this was the, you know, that Iraqis were so upset at those photos that they decided to behead a contractor. But at the same time, if you think about it this way, those Abu Ghraib photos really turned off Americans to the war. It really wasn't that far into the war when they happened, and people were. It was marked a turning point, and when people were starting to get really sick of the Iraq War, and the Nick Berg video essentially gave people a reason to get back into it, and that reason was, well, of course we need to be over there and fight these absolute barbaric animals who behead people, you know, because Americans, you know, us Westerners, we don't behead people, you know, we're more civilized, which to me was always been a funny argument, because in a sense, if you're the type of person who can behead someone, I mean, it shows an amazing, I guess, desensitization to death itself. I mean, like if you're the type of person who can go through with cutting someone's head off, I mean, I don't mean to say this in the wrong way, but it takes a lot more courage and balls to do that than it does to like drone bomb someone. So,
well, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I mean, to call it more animal, I don't really see it as more animal. I see it as more just being kind of fucking, you know, like hardcore killer, you know, hardcore killer mentality. Like, and I don't know. I don't see that as like a fundamentally animal or uncivilized thing to do. I mean, it's just, they don't have drones, you know, they don't have, I don't know. I don't even know where I was going with that, but
no, but I know what you mean, because I completely agree. I think that it's one of those things where I think the thing about drones is you are disconnected when you do it. You don't, I mean, it could feel, I mean, I've never been, I've never seen it or been a part of anybody using a drone, but I would assume that it's very similar to playing a video game in some sort. So so in that case, it almost could not feel real, you know, where like when you're doing it, when you feel the person, when you're near the person, when you can smell, you can hear, you know, when they're right there and you're a part of it, you know, and you're feeling it and you're seeing the blood and all that stuff. I think it's completely different than, you know, like you said, a drone attack where you could hit a button, you know, blow people up and not, you know, you go home the next, you know, that same day and never really feel like you killed anybody because you're disconnected from it. So it definitely is completely different. The other thing was their orange jumpsuits. That reminded me of your sister's recent special in Gitmo. Do you think that was like a symbolizing, like it was because I heard some people talk about how they think that the reason why they're orange jumpsuits was because they were angry about Gitmo, which they obviously, if you know, Gitmo, there's plenty of people there who, and you know better than I do, that people there who have been there for years, never had a lawyer, never been, you know, never had a chance to go to trial, never even been prosecuted with anything, you know, never been, so it just, was that a symbol for Gitmo, or was that Abu Ghraib? What was it? Did they ever mention it, or?
Your question was, did the orange jumpsuits serve as any symbolism in these videos? Probably. I mean, if you've seen the Nick Berg video, he's also wearing an orange jumpsuit. But I don't know. I mean, you know, the thing is with these types of with any type of group that really hates the United States, they'll always find I mean, it's really easy, I guess, now to find something as a bone of contention to use against us. So I guess for me personally, I try to stay away from, I guess I perceive the whole idea of like this concept of blowback as being sort of formed out of this sort of liberal guilt complex about living in the empire, feeling like everything a terrorist organization does or an overseas group does is because of our foreign policy. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that. And I think that, I don't think that's what you were saying, but I just think that, because I consider myself fairly liberal, like I'm, in the literal sense. And I don't think that, I don't know, I just don't think that this has anything to do with the bad things we're doing to Muslims here. I think that what ISIS has learned, and other terrorist groups have learned this as well, but ISIS has learned particularly well, is that when you wage this sort of PR war like this with slick videos, you act really like really scary and stuff like this, you're feeding directly into the war machine of the United States and sort of creating this other side of a very symbiotic relationship where ISIS knows that the United States will take the bait because the United States is always looking for excuses to take the bait, always looking for excuses to do things in the Middle East, I should say. And ISIS gives them the perfect excuse because it's not like, when we had like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, for example, there was no necessarily organizational structure that was, I guess, perceptible to us here in America. Like there was a lot of videos, there was like Zarqawi, the supposed leader of the Iraqi insurgency, but it was harder for Americans to see that as like some kind of legitimate army or a cohesive threat. So ISIS, I guess, it's like the perfect thing for us to get sucked back in again. I just don't know how any other way to explain it.
So in other words, it's working in their favor because they want. I mean, one, they're justifying, because you look at it, the U.S. they try to go in Syria, they try to create a war or at least justify Iran as this evil country that we need to invade. So now, like, the U.S. have been looking for a reason to invade a country, and now you gave it to them, right? Sorry, I shouldn't ask you a question right when you were
No. Yeah, I mean, and if you actually go back and look at Anwar al-Awlaki's videos, for example, he seems to me more moderate than any of these like ISIS spokespeople. So in my mind, it doesn't seem like the United States is going after the most extreme or the most necessarily dangerous head of any of these organizations. I mean, to me, by killing someone like Anwar al-Awlaki, you actually create somewhat of a vacuum and a void for someone more extreme, than him to appear. So I don't know. It's just fascinating to me that it just seems to work exactly in our favor. We've wanted to go into Syria since the very beginning. I mean, I'm not the only one who sees that. So it's like, why would anybody take at face value the reasons why we're going in now? I mean,
and like you mentioned, the timing of the beheading. So it makes sense because now you're releasing this footage at a perfect time to get people outraged, to get people angry. I mean, you look at like the chemical weapons that supposedly this Syrian government used. I mean, it was I read reports that type of chemical, it was linked that the type of chemical it was something that the government didn't have. It was something that the rebels would have had. So I mean, you look at it, and the fact that there was that internal conflict was going on, that civil war was going on for years, and we never got involved. And the mainstream media in the U.S. never talked about it. People were dying every day, no big deal. But for all of a sudden, the U.S. went on like a month-long propaganda campaign of like chemical weapons. We have to do something. And it's just like, wait. So it's okay when people are killing each other with guns and all that stuff, but it's the chemical weapons that like that's where the line was drawn. So that was I think it was pretty obvious that like the U.S. was trying to sell us on a war. And the one thing that I liked was was that it was a victory for the people, because we did say, no, we're not going to this war. We don't know who the fuck you're giving weapons to. And in the past, I mean, it's like one of my favorite quotes, and the next war, it's one of my favorite quotes, but I never get it right, and I have no idea who said it. So I guess I shouldn't say it's one of my favorite quotes, but it's a good quote, because it goes that the next war starts when the people who remember the last one are gone. And it's like the idea of when people forget, the past, then you can easily trick people into doing the same thing again. And I feel like we're going into Iraq, and we're detached from the fact that the reason why Iraq's a mess is because of us. It's like we've already forgotten that, it's a mess because of us. As much as people don't want to admit it, and it's not a very popular thing to say, is Iraq was better with Saddam there, and people don't want to hear that, but it's absolutely true. I have a friend that was born in Iraq. I met a guy months ago who fled from Iraq, and he said he's like, yeah, obviously there's different types of religion, and the Sunnis and the Shiites, and they're not getting along, and it's that conflict, and that was there before when Saddam was there. But because everybody was so afraid of Saddam, there was peace because nobody would piss him off, and he ruled with iron fist. Yeah, but people, as long as you didn't say anything bad about Saddam, you could go to work, you could go to do your everyday things, and live in some type of at least not be afraid that there's a bombing or whatever, or there wasn't that much chaos as there is today, or anarchy. So as much as people don't want to admit, and same thing with Libya. I mean, we killed Gaddafi. I mean, people from World War II at least got a trial, and it's like, we killed Gaddafi. If he was so bad, why didn't his people get to put him in front of his own people, put a judge there, and let's look at his crimes and see what they want to do with him, and so it just it's kind of like Saddam. Saddam, we had a trial for him, even though I saw a special and it seemed like it was a little tainted, a little bit. It was I saw the special on Saddam's trial, and it was actually pretty surprising that one of the guys that defended him was, and you probably know who it is, was a American lawyer, which was because he just wanted to make sure he had a fair trial, which in that case makes sense. I mean, if you're one of those people that are I mean, everybody deserves a fair trial, is what I'm saying, regardless how evil you are or whatnot. But like I was saying before, yeah, it's not a very popular thing. But at least when Saddam was there, there was some type of, it was stability. And right now it's chaos. And we act like, oh, we didn't accomplish shit. We just made things. And that makes me think, do we ever really want to accomplish anything besides destabilizing everything so we can constantly continue to spend money on war and spend money on I mean, you just think of all these companies that profit from war, and it's just like, when we're not in a war, I could just imagine how pissed the CEOs are, or holy fuck, we're not making this amount of money this year or this quarter or whatever. So you could just imagine in the influence you would have when you have that much money. I mean, Jesse Ventura said it once, when he's just like, when you spend millions of dollars to get a job, become the president, that only pays thousands, obviously you're making money somewhere else, and you're getting, there's backdoor deals. And I mean, just any logical person, regardless if you believe that in any type of conspiracies or whatever, I mean, just think about it. You're spending millions and millions of dollars to get a job that pays thousands. And a lot of these guys, like Mitt Romney, who was a businessman, that any good businessman will tell you that's an awful business decision, So it's obviously there's some shit going on. So I just think that's a simple way of looking at it, where people can understand, obviously they're making money somewhere else. And the power, anytime there's power equals money, money equals power. So it goes both ways. So no idea where my question was and all that, but I think that the Libya thing and the Iraq thing it's interesting, because like I said, I think we forget quickly, and the government kind of capitalizes on the fact that we just oh shit, this country's a mess, we don't know why, let's go help. It's and then it's you just do a little bit of research, or you just remember, in this case with Iraq, holy shit, we're a part of why it's a mess. So I definitely think people forget, if we forget the past quickly, and it causes harm we're easily tricked.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that irks me the most about the Iraq War, just looking back on it this many years after, is and I normally hate this phrase, because I get trolled online sometimes for some of this 9/11 research I do. I get called limited hangout because I don't go out on a limb and repeat unsubstantiated facts from the 9/11 truth movement very often. But one of the biggest limited hangout ops of all, I think, was this idea that Bush lied about WMDs, and that was sort of the main transgression or immorality about the Iraq War, that they used this lie of WMDs to get us in. When in reality, I mean, I thought about this like a couple months ago when I was doing an episode with Abby, that it seems to me, when you look back at all of it, that the Bush administration was merely just using the WMDs thing as one facet of like many different reasons they were trying to come up with for going in. I mean, they tried to, they were even using stuff about Saddam's sort of totalitarianism and how evil of a dictator he was. I mean, anything under the sun they were trying to use. But I recently reread, something that was really famous many years ago that doesn't really get much coverage now, the Downing Street memo, which sort of proved without a doubt that the Bush administration was fixing the intelligence around the policy that they had already decided to do. But I thought one of the most interesting parts of this Downing Street memo is they actually are hoping that Saddam will call their bluff. They're hoping that Saddam will simply reject the weapons inspectors to give them an instant end to the war. So when Saddam, being this evil, crazy, supposedly, just out of control dictator that he was, when he actually agreed to the weapons inspections, I think that it threw a wrench into their plans. They just assumed that he was going to be like, no, fuck you guys. And then once they did that, I think it sort of got them in this trap where, they didn't give a shit about finding weapons or not. They never cared about it in the first place. That was just merely one of their methods to get the UN involved and try to legitimize it all. And in the end, we simply just refused to go along with the UN's charter and just decided to end the inspections early and invade. So I don't know. I call that a limited hangout because I feel like it makes an excuse for the Bush administration, like they, some kind of excuse there, when in reality, I think we just wanted to fuck up the country and turn the whole Middle East upside down. And that was just merely our first real theater war in that department. And I don't, I know some people probably made money off the Iraq war and stuff like that, but, I don't know if it's necessarily about like short-term financial gains or corporate profits. I see it as a much longer, like really long, slow motion chess match kind of a thing, where really the only ones left standing at the end are going to be Russia, China, and the United States. And that's sort of where things are still heading. I feel, maybe Israel in there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think that there's probably, I mean, it's weird because sometimes I think maybe it is as simple as just destabilizing it to continue to spend money on war. But obviously, like there must be a greater plan, and there must be, I mean, the way that like, NATO is going east and Russia's like, hey, what the fuck you guys doing? We had this deal in the early 90s. NATO wasn't going to go east, and now it's like, you didn't like it when I put missiles in Cuba and we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. You told me to stay the fuck out of the Americas. So how about you stay the fuck out of Eastern Europe, and never mind, they've been invaded, by Germany a few times. So it's like, obviously, like, I understand what they're afraid of. I understand. I mean, as much as people hate Putin, like, people have to look at the fact that he has to look at his country. And when you have this other world power that is obviously, which Putin's no idiot, he understands that we're invading countries with false justifications. He knows that we can easily try to create Russia as a, this boogeyman, which we do, but create it to a point where we can justify getting in a war with them. So obviously he has to, look at his own safety, his country's own safety, and I think that it's, there should be nothing wrong with saying, hey, you stay in your neck of the woods, we stay in our neck of the woods, and that's it. And even with like the Kiev thing and Crimea and all these things, like they understand that Ukraine has a port there, and if and a lot of Ukrainians, and I have a lot of Ukrainian friends, they see themselves as Russian. I have some Ukrainian friends that speak no Ukrainian. They grew up speaking Russian. They consider themselves Russians. Like, that's one other thing people don't understand. Like, it's not that these Ukrainian people want to, not all of them want to get away from, from Russia. A lot of them do see themselves as Russians, and I think that it's okay if they want to separate, and some want to be a part of Russia, and the other ones want to have their independence. But I also think there's probably a strategy of understanding that if you can get Ukraine in NATO, then all of a sudden you have, or the EU or whatever, like, and get them away from Russia, all of a sudden you have a port that Russia doesn't have, because I know they have their Navy there, right? If I'm correct, like, they have, it's probably, they're surrounded by countries, so it's probably a very useful place to store a Navy and get to the water from there and stuff like that. So I think strategy wise, I think that it's important, and I think that Russia understands that, and I think the U.S. understands that, and that's probably one of the reasons why they do want to cause some conflict. But it's amazing when you talk to people from, like, the UK, and I was just watching one of the RT shows. I'm forgetting what show it was, but somebody came to the US and then they went back to UK to be on the show, and they were talking about how, like, they were amazed by how little we talked about any actual news in Europe or anywhere else. Like, we literally just, like, ISIS, and we don't really say anything, like, no details about anything that what's really going on. And it's almost like we live in this bubble where we're just fed this one little piece of information, and then that's gonna reflect, or that's gonna mold our worldview, and without any real information, not really talking about any serious details on what's going on. And I think it's weird, because I think it's good that we have shows like RT or Breaking the Set and RT, and they have a lot of good shows on RT, and I do, obviously everybody, oh, well, RT, it's Russian television. I'm like, well, okay, then ignore the Russian news anytime they speak about Russian, but look at everything else, and you can't tell me that you're not getting the most truthful or at least open-minded news compared to, like, CNN or Fox News or whatever. Like, obviously, you might not want to get your Russian news from there, but when you live in America and you want to try to get American news, then it only makes sense that at least Russian TV is not going to try to mold some happy perspective on the U.S. They probably won't be afraid to say, hey, this corporation's, is evil and corrupt, or this, government policy is evil and corrupt, and they, so to me, that was what turned me on from going to RT, and I think it's scary, the fact that so many of us don't have time to do our own research. So many of us, I mean, I hear you on your Media Roots podcast and on different interviews, and it's amazing the information you consume and you can store and say, but unfortunately, I think that it is kind of scary that a lot of people do have to work full time, and really their little piece of news they get every day is putting on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC on the TV for 5 minutes while they put their kids in the car or make lunch for the next day. And I think that's scary. It's scary, and I think that it's cool that the younger generation cares about or is getting away from that, because I mean, really, people who watch that old news channels are people who are dying right now, and I think eventually, like, people our age and younger aren't really going to care about what CNN says or whatever. They're going to get their news from their phone and from the Apple TV, whatever it's called, or your Chromecast, and watch what's online on TV and stuff like that. So I think that, I mean, I do it. I watch basically almost zero actual cable or satellite TV, and watch almost everything online. Get all my shows that I like, or most of them are on YouTube. So I just think that that's where the future's going. I think it's a good thing, because I do think that our mainstream media sucks, and and we do need, and the younger generation is going towards that, and I think that's the future. I think I truly think that internet, as long as it stays like pirate and it stays anarchist, where we can kind of do what we want for the most part, and obviously net neutrality is a huge issue, which I think a lot of people don't know about. And I think if we all enjoy the internet, it's amazing that all these people who enjoy the internet, if they actually knew that the internet as they know it could change, I think that it would have a giant uproar, and I think it needs to have a giant uproar so we can keep things the way they are. So what's your opinion on everything? You think that is there a light at the end of the tunnel when you look at the younger, it seems like the younger crowd is getting away from a lot of this, corporate controlled mainstream media, and it's a good thing that we have these podcasts and we have, James Corbett and all these alternative medias that we enjoy. You think that's a positive thing, and or do you think that in some way they're going to put a stranglehold on us by controlling the internet or whatever, and we're fucked regardless?
Well, I think I don't know about the internet. That's still up in the air, but I think that of course it's good to have more independent voices, speaking more often and more exposure for that. But I guess what scares me the most about culture being co-opted is how good corporations have gotten about sort of buying real estate in areas of culture that are like kind of cutting edge or really hip and still relatively underground. And I think that that's where the real damage is going to be done, is where corporations try to steer trends in ways that they haven't really managed to do before. It's hard to really put it into words, but I think that mainstream media is obviously one issue, but I see mainstream media lessening their stranglehold over time because of the reasons that you laid out. But I see other things having more of a stranglehold over time, like, like certain aspects of like, I don't know, like art culture or music culture. And I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that, but I do think, it's a great thing that we can be doing this right now and that this will go up on the internet and can be seen by anybody. And I just wanted to touch really quickly on what you were saying about Russia and the Ukraine. As much as I don't support what the Russian government is doing. I don't support what the U.S. government is doing. But I do think that the United States has maintained, against my better interest. I wish this wasn't the case, but I think that they have maintained a superior playing field in the sense that they still it's actually in some ways shocking to me that the United States would still allow RT to be broadcast here. But in a way, if you think about it, that makes the United States look good and more free and more, less censored, that they would allow Russia Today to be broadcast here. Putin and the Russian government have started to heavily crack down on even like blogging in Russia. And they recently closed down the United States government media mouthpiece, Voice of America, and Radio Free Europe over in Russia. So I think, I think that's a mistake, obviously, for Russia to do. But somehow that seems to work for them over there to sort of crack down more on free speech. But I do think that eventually something has to give. Either they'll sanction Russia to the point where Russia Today will not be able to operate here anymore, or some other form of attack will happen against the network, or Russia will have more, some kind of PR InfoWar style thing going on, like, similar to the Liz Wall resignation. So I don't know where that's going to go, but I see, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I definitely think that the U.S. ultimately is more clever with its propaganda, while somehow able to make Russia look bad, but allow Russia Today to exist in the country, is kind of a smart move strategically to do. Whereas like Putin banning a blogger, maybe in the short term that would work, but I don't think it's a good strategic plan. I mean, it's just going to give the United States more reasons to be like, look at that country, and how much more free we are than them, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so what you're saying about corporations and getting into different, not just getting in media, but finding other ways to influence people. I think it's interesting because you're talking about just as cannabis becomes a bigger business and corporations get involved in it, that could be an issue too, because right now we look at this like really hippie thing that could help you, expand your mind and stuff. But who knows what's going to happen when corporations find out, holy shit, I can make money off this, and they get involved in it. And then all of a sudden cannabis is controlled by big corporate companies that only care about the bottom line and not about, freeing up this plant that shouldn't be illegal in the first place. So I mean, it definitely, you know, that's definitely one of those things where it's just like, it's good that weed is getting, I guess, socially acceptable, and it's getting bigger, and people are looking at it in like the drug light. You know, like they're not looking at it as putting it in the same place that you would put coke or speed or whatever. But I think that it's definitely one of those things where it makes you wonder, because as those companies get bigger, then they're going to, obviously big corporations have influence with lobbyists and stuff like that. Now, what's going to happen when we have like weed lobbyists? Like, what are they going to lobby for? I don't know. I hope good things, but who knows? I mean, you know, maybe they're going to put something else off the market that's going to be a competitor. So I don't know. It is an interesting thing, you know, like when you look into the future, like what possibly could happen, you know, which route are we going to take, you know, and so I think that all is super interesting. And back to 9/11, did you I tweeted actually a bunch of people because it was such a good documentary. I don't know if you ever seen it, but it was called 9/11 New Pearl Harbor. Have you ever seen it? It's like a 4-hour documentary.
Yes, I have seen a New Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, super good documentary. I don't even know how I ran about it, but the thing about internet documentaries is you're always a little afraid that they could either be really like good and you're like, holy shit, somebody did this and like at home on their computer, or you're gonna like, holy shit, this is crap and I can't believe that somebody put this online. But so it's definitely. But I'll tell you, that fucking movie blew my mind, because the way that he's focused, if anybody hasn't seen it, I shared it on Facebook and on Twitter, and it's called 9/11 on New Pearl Harbor. You can find it online for free. Another great documentary that you and your sister talked about, which I saw after you guys raved about it, was The United States of Secrets, which is fucking awesome, by Frontline, and it's on YouTube also for free. Hopefully it stays on there for free. I don't know. I'm sure PBS will probably try to get it down or whatever. But I know I looked at it last night to see if it was still up, and it was. So I highly recommend both of these. They're both really, really good. And yeah, New Pearl Harbor. It was so good because he focused on like the debunkers and like their arguments, and kind of picked apart each point. And I thought it was really important to see the debunkers right next to, like, you know, I guess the evidence, and because this way you can kind of, because what happens is that, okay, somebody says something, and then, you know, a debunker will write a comment on the video, or you'll hear somebody, a friend of yours, debunk it. Oh, that's debunked, blah, blah, blah. And then you really don't know what to say after that. But to see everything, you know, side by side like that was really, really good. And I think it was like an Italian filmmaker or something like that. And and it's like 4 hours, but I send like a text message to a bunch of my friends, and like, you gotta watch this, and I actually have a few friends that watched the whole thing in a couple days, and you know, text messaged me not angry that I sent them the link, but angry that, like, holy shit, like it just, I think, reignited a flame in them, like just seeing all the evidence. And like, I think when things look that clear and that obvious, it's hard for you not to get irate and get angry. And I think, you know, I don't know if we talked about it on the air or before we start recording, about how me and you, we're two people that, like, we still, first of all, I don't see it like 9/11 truther as a bad term. I think the idea that, you know, one of the biggest events in American history, you want truth, you know, in what happened with that event. I don't see anything wrong with that. I know some people try to stray away from that at times, or they say, oh, let's move on to other topics. We're obviously never going to find out. And I'm just like, listen, there's like, just because, that's like saying, well, I'm never going to change the world, so I should never do anything. Like, no, just because you can't look at the outcome. Like, in your heart, if you truly are passionate about something and you truly feel like, you know, something should be said, then say it, you know. And I think that people shouldn't look at, oh, well, what can I do? I think, you know, it's like the reason why I started this podcast, the whole idea of the ripple effect. I think that if every one of us do spark conversation and do change people's mind, I remember when I first started watching or getting into the 9/11 thing and really started looking into it and learning shit, and it blew my fucking mind. I mean, it was like somebody just took down a wall, and I just realized, like, we're in the Matrix or we're all robots or something. I'm like, dude, nothing is what it seems, apparently. And I got a lot of backlash with friends that are like, dude, you're fucking crazy. They dismiss it immediately and stuff like that. And now a lot of them are coming around. So it's just like, you know, it probably is a lot of people who had the balls to continue to talk about it and continue to bring it up, even though they knew that people were gonna you know, butt heads with you, or you know, people are gonna get upset, and you know, sometimes you get ex-military people that you don't want to bring it up to because they get really upset, you know. And So I think that if we do bring it up, we do talk about it, I think one day people are going to look in the history books and they're going to look at it as maybe, I think possibly even bigger than Pearl Harbor, because I just think that all the things that happened afterwards, from the NSA to, all the wars to, just all these things, and never mind that, like the access to information we have. I mean, a lot of people during Pearl Harbor, they didn't have the ability to go online a couple years later and then find out that, holy shit, like, they could have possibly instigated it. They could have possibly let it happen. All this stuff. Like, we're today, like, we have all this information flowing. So I think that it's going to be maybe a bigger, it's going to leave a bigger mark on history. But I think it's a really great documentary. And so when did you run into it? Did you watch it recently, or did you run into it a while ago? Or
New Pearl Harbor, I think it came out a little under a year ago, and I don't remember where I first saw it, but I started watching the first part. I was a little skeptical of the production values at first, and then as the movie unfolded, I couldn't stop watching. I mean, it was just totally sucked me in. And I think my favorite part of the whole movie was actually the first 2-hour stretch where it's just about the hijackers and what might have happened on those planes and sort of the air response and that kind of stuff. Like that, the whole timeline aspect of that day really fascinates me. And he did bring up some interesting stuff about the buildings, but I thought there was less new content in that section. Like the two main things in the parts about the buildings that were really interesting was he goes through all sort of the asbestos abatement paperwork for the buildings and how the Port Authority was getting all these bids on how much it would cost to remove all the asbestos. And then also there was like a really crazy video clip I had never seen before of a human being ejected from the building via a blast in one of the windows, way before it collapsed. So stuff like that. I was just like, whoa, that's really crazy. I don't even know what to think about that. But, I have the tendency to try to be a rational skeptic with my own tendency to be a conspiracy theorist. So like, early on, when I would watch a lot of these 9/11 documentaries, I would sort of force myself to read and look over some of the debunking stuff, just because I didn't necessarily trust that all this information was accurate or whatever. And some of it ended up not being accurate. And and in the end, some of the debunkers were more right in certain areas, but of course not all areas. One of the main ones I think I mentioned on here last time was that Fat Bin Laden tape, where it really is Bin Laden, but for some reason a lot of people in the movement think that it's like some actor or something, which is not true. It's really Bin Laden in that tape. But so yeah, New Pearl Harbor, man. I mean, it sort of got me to remember like why I started getting so into this in the first place. Like it sort of reignited that passion inside of me, where I was like, I have zero doubt that 9/11 was an inside job, and I'm not saying that I know who did 9/11. I just mean that it couldn't have happened without a lot of inside help.
And that's an important point, because I think that a lot of people assume when you say there's some fuckery with 9/11, they automatically assume, oh, you're saying the government did it, Bush did it, and I'm like, no, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. What I'm saying is that let's get away from pointing the finger and who possibly did it, because that we don't know. Let's look at the things we do know, and let's look at all the holes in the official story, all the things from like obviously the way the plane went into the Pentagon, and that it obviously couldn't have been flown that way, and it hit phone lines or towers or whatever, which means it was at a low height, and it's a commercial fucking plane. So two commercial planes took down 3 towers in New York, in the city, which people, they try to convince us that's what happened. But you're telling me the same plane or the same similar type plane hit the Pentagon and left such a little hole? Like, that's crazy to me. And the fact that the grass wasn't touched, it wasn't like ripped up from it bumping. These guys never did a solo plane ride, which a lot of people say is basic. Once you get good enough to fly a plane, they let you take off and land, one little run solo, and they weren't even experienced enough to do that. And the fact that they could do that with a plane. The thing about that movie that was interesting too was the fact that, and it was one thing I never really thought about, was the speed of the planes when they were at basically sea level, because when they went in the towers, they looked like they were going very fast. And they brought up the fact that I think it was called fluttering or flutter, when a plane is, has thin air and it's in, and it's high, then it can go much quicker because obviously the air is very thin and the wings can handle it. But when it's at a sea level and the air is thicker, then obviously going at 500 miles an hour, it's the friction or the I'm not even sure what term to use, but because the air is thicker, it can't go at those speeds. Those wings would just rip off. So that was the other thing that was kind of interesting with those planes, was the fact that at those heights, could they possibly even go at those speeds? And but there's tons of good stuff, and that's why I even recommend 9/11 Press for Truth, because it's not a conspiracy documentary. It is basically just the four widows, the New Jersey widows who all lost loved ones on September 11th, who pushed for the commission report, because a lot of people assume the commission report was pushed by Dick Cheney and President Bush. No, it wasn't. They're not the ones who wanted to go out of their way to investigate. It was those widows who pushed for that. And then the fact that the head of the commission report was Henry Kissinger, who anybody who hasn't watched the documentary, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, based on the book by Christopher Hitchens, please watch it. I mean, this guy's a war criminal. He won a Nobel Peace Prize, but yet can't go into certain countries without getting arrested because he's considered a war criminal. So, I mean, that tells you a little bit about the guy who's the head of the commission report. And then I remember the really interesting thing about 9/11 Press for Truth was when the widows were talking to, they requested a meeting with Henry Kissinger, and they were saying if they had any links to the bin Laden family or any clients that were bin Ladens, and like he almost fell off his chair, I guess, and was surprised that they mentioned that because they did some research on him. And so I'm like, that alone, I'm like, can you believe this? So the person that they're linking to September 11th is a bin Laden, and then the guy, the head of investigating the bin Laden, has links to the bin Laden family. I'm like you couldn't write a better Denzel movie. It's like it obviously, there's just so many fucking holes in the story. It's crazy. And then the fact that Dick Cheney and President Bush wouldn't be interviewed separately or under oath. They had to be together, and they with just, I think, one person from the commission report. And then the other really interesting thing is, which I've been hearing a lot of talk about recently, is those 28 pages that were I guess or they're classified, right? Have you heard some conversation about those 28 pages? Can you fill people who in on it, and myself, because I don't know too much about it, I've only heard conversations about how is it as big of a deal as people are making it out to be, the 28 pages?
My feeling on that, at first I was pretty excited by it, but I'll give you the little basic rundown of what it is. So there was 3 different 9/11 investigations. 2 of them were sort of happening concurrently at the same time. There was the FBI's Pent Bomb investigation, which they called it, which started on the day of 9/11 itself. So the FBI was conducting their own, investigation internally, not for the public consumption. And I think sometime in around May, Tom Daschle and other members of the Senate were trying to start what was later called the congressional inquiry into 9/11. So this was in 2002. There was hearings conducted in the Senate and the Congress, I think, of senators and congresspeople asking different officials about aspects of 9/11. So this was actually long before the 9/11 Commission report. And in this report, in private hearings, there was 28 pages of this congressional inquiry, which were redacted and deemed to be national security issues, and they were made classified. And if you actually get a copy of the report, you can find it online. It's literally, the chapter's title is there, saying something like possible foreign funding of the attacks, or foreign funders or state actors in the attacks. So the chapter is clearly marked that that's what the chapter is going to say. And then the entire chapter is literally blacked out, like line for line, just black streaks across the whole thing, going on for 28 entire pages. So that's what people are talking about. And the thing that I'm not super hopeful about what's in those 28 pages, because one of the people mainly pushing for the release of those 28 pages is Senator Bob Graham. And I think Senator Bob Graham himself has some very shady and suspicious connections to the 9/11 attacks themselves. He was actually eating breakfast on the morning of 9/11 with a Pakistani ISI general who wire transferred $100,000 to Muhammad Atta, which is allegedly the lead hijacker on 9/11. And he's been pushing for the release of these 28 pages for years. So I don't know what that means. I mean, is there anything in there that's going to really turn the 9/11 official story as we know it upside down? I mean, hopefully. But if it's just implicating Saudi Arabian involvement in the attacks, then we already have a lot of evidence that's already out there to point to that, and even some specific people too. So I don't know. I'm just going to say I'm not holding that much hope for it. I don't think there's anything in there that's going to fundamentally change, maybe the general public's understanding of 9/11, but it's not going to change, your and I's understanding of 9/11 that much. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, well, it is funny how like Saudi Arabia never gets talked about, and it's funny because even talking about the beheadings, I was reading somewhere where they said they're making a huge deal about these 2 beheadings, but yet in Saudi Arabia in the same time frame it had like 11 beheadings. It's like it's amazing how like we do this great job of talking about human rights in certain countries and this and that and women's rights, but yet Saudi Arabia obviously they have no women's rights, and they have they just have they go by their own rules. So it is pretty amazing how they get a pass on everything, and the fact that all the hijackers were Saudis. I mean,
14 of them.
Yeah, and Bin Laden himself was a Saudi. So it's all these things are just it's pretty amazing, because the thing is, it's not really, when people call the conspiracy theory the 9/11 thing, it's just like, it's silly to me, because it's like, what can, like, a theory? I'm like, all we're saying is there's a lot of holes, and the holes are not, it's like, when I hear conspiracy theory, I feel like it's people are putting it in the realm of like, reptilians or chemtrails or whatever, when I'm like, no, because that stuff I guess can be debated, but but this cannot be debated. Like, there's just so many freaking holes in this story that it's crazy, and that's why I think that's super important to talk about, for people to watch 9/11, a new Pearl Harbor, because this isn't the first time this shit's happened, and Pearl Harbor was it's kind of a similar thing, and you were adjusting your mic.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. And so yeah, I think that it's it is important that people look into that and stuff. So but there is something. It's funny because you got in you talked about Sam Harris on Twitter, and I remember reading that. And one thing, it's funny, I had this conversation with Daniele Bignelli when he was on. There's something about people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and people who are just like, so like, they focus so much of their dislike of religion on Muslims. It kind of bothers me, and I don't know if it bothers me because I feel like it's kind of like, because Israel, like Saudi Arabia, gets a pass on so much, or maybe they make a point. I mean, I don't know. They're I guess from their perspective, it's, well, they're extremists because of their religion, but like you talked about before, well, you say not everything. Not all their hatred for us has to do with just our drone attacks and stuff like that. I mean, when you're saying that, it kind of reminded me of Sam Harris a little bit, because it sounded like something maybe he might say. I'm not saying that, but do you see how like that would be kind of a similar debate? The idea of, well, not all their hatred for us is because of our drone attacks. A lot of it is because their religion is extreme or whatever. And what
I could see how you would interpret it that way. And in a way, I guess on the surface, it would almost seem like I'm criticizing sort of that like liberal idea that because we do these horrible things to Muslim countries, they want to hurt us. But what I really meant is that I think that it's almost by design that in some ways it's better for the United States to actually just have people literally being born into families that already are destined to do some kind of jihad style action than it is for, in terms of, if the United States wants to continue building this empire and go into all these Middle Eastern countries, that type of scenario is better for us, because then people just generate, families are born into this sort of idea that they must attack the West or hate the West. And I'm not saying that they don't have any right to, or they shouldn't feel that way, but I do think it's become so ingrained now that it's a completely self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's exactly what we want. I mean, I think that if we, as like I was saying earlier, as long as we keep doing these types of attacks, let's just put it this way, that Muslims in these other countries will start to actually appear to us to be these more cartoonish, violent stereotypes, because in some ways they're being pushed more and more into that direction by sort of the nature of what's happening. And I'm not even like, yeah, and Sam Harris, I mean, he's a guy who's always, it seems like he has aligned interests with the war on terror, sort of ideologically. And that's what bothers me about him, is I see there's sort of a mutual alignment there, where he sees himself as sort of this lecturer, this finger wagger towards other liberals, where it's like, don't defend Muslims, you know, because the Muslim religion is inherently like, you know, anti-liberal or something like that. But I see him more as just like somebody who was scared by 9/11, and who this is his way of sort of reacting to it. And I see other people like Salman Rushdie, like Richard Dawkins, coming from a similar perspective, who it's like they're trying to rationalize and explain in a rational way why they're so afraid of Muslims, essentially. And I think it ultimately comes down to an irrational fear that's almost as ridiculous as believing in religion in the first place. I mean, if you're this afraid of Muslim terrorists, then you have the same mental issue as someone who believes in a fictional godlike entity. It's your own imagination, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I get, my issue with it is that fact that, like Abby talked about on her show with like the Gaza Strip, and just the idea, and like even an artist that I like, I don't know if you're familiar with Low Key. He's a hip hop artist, from a rapper from the UK, and he's no. he has this. You'd probably like his stuff if you like Immortal Techniques. It's similar, like very politically driven. And actually, they did a song together back. That's actually how I found out about Immortal Techniques. He was on a song with Low Key, and you know who Akela is? He's also another UK rapper artist who actually, he's been on London Real recently, which was a really interesting podcast. But yeah, but he's Middle Eastern. I think he's half Middle Eastern, half English, and he talks a lot about like the way people look at Muslims and stuff like that. And I have a friend who's Egyptian, and I remember him telling me how if people ask him, I forget how he worded it, but he basically, the point is that if people ask him if he's if he tells people he's Egyptian, then basically they look at him like, oh shit, that's where the pyramids are, that's cool, But if he tells people he's Muslim, because people, he's darker skinned, so people will wonder, hey, what's your nationality, where are you from, or whatever. And if he says he's Muslim, he's like, they look at him at a completely different light, even though Egyptian people are Muslim. But it's like that word has been tainted, where just like people, you tell people you're Muslim, and it's like, whoa, oh, you're Muslim? Oh, that all of a sudden it's like, they've done a great job of painting this picture like all Muslims are maybe not all terrorists, but they're all capable of being terrorists or have some link to terrorism,
Well, that's what bugs me so much about Sam Harris's bullshit, is he's actually, in a lot of ways, he sounds like those right-wing radio talk show hosts like Michael Savage, who will say that the Quran itself encourages violence and killing innocent people and stuff. I mean, Sam Harris,
Michael Savage, he's not the gay. No, that's Dan Savage. I'm kidding.
Yeah, Michael Savage is an interesting guy. I mean, I don't like a lot of his views, but in the last 2 years, he seemed to come a lot more on the side of my beliefs than I expected. But
really, yeah, I haven't listened to him in a while, but I know a lot of people who are fans of him. But he definitely does seem like for a while, he was pretty not open-minded. I mean, he was he was just had one view and was and to me that does nobody any good. I've had people on the show I disagree with, and I'm okay with that, and I like talking to people that don't necessarily have the exact same views I have, because I might be wrong, and that's something that I think we're all afraid of being. But I think once we accept the fact that figuring out that you're wrong only means you're that much closer to being right. Like, I think that, that's a good thing. I think that that's a step in the right direction. We have to stop looking at being wrong like it's one of those things where like, oh shit, it means I'm an idiot. No, it just means that you're open-minded enough to believe. I mean, I remember like talking about the September 11th thing. Same thing. Like, a lot of people just wouldn't. I think a lot of it is they just didn't want to admit that maybe something of what there's some substance to what I was saying, and some of it was, I think it was hard to believe that your whole world was turned upside down once you accept the idea that they might have let it happen, or it didn't turn out the way the official story said. But I think some of it also is that ego of, I don't want to admit I'm wrong, and I think that's a bad thing, and that's the one thing I love about you and Abby, is that both of you guys are very open-minded, and I've heard you, even people you don't like, I've heard you state and quote them and say, and say things positive, something positive about them, which I think is awesome, and I think more people need to do that, So Michael Savage, you're saying, is coming around. He seems like he's not as one-sided as he was.
Well, I just don't hate him as much as I used to. I mean, the weird thing about him, it's actually kind of fascinating, is he is definitely, if you listen to only part of what he's saying, like if you listen to like 5 minutes of his show, he'll seem like a totally typical Muslim-hating, pro-Israel, anti-Arab, sort of right-wing conservative guy. But then you listen to another 5 minutes, just, random pick another 5 minutes from his show, he'll be talking about how the United States is trying to instigate war with Russia, and how Putin is just defending himself, and how the U.S. started all this in Ukraine, and maybe even the U.S. instigated the shoot down of the Malaysian plane. So it's like he's kind of on both. It's weird that and then also he has like people like he has Paul Joseph Watson come onto his show now. And I remember Alex Jones and Michael Savage used to be almost like enemies back in the day. So it's interesting that that's sort of merged. I mean, it goes along the same lines as like Drudge Report sort of promoting InfoWars stories now. It's like, some of those old guard conservative people are taking bits and pieces from, the so-called conspiracy or sort of more alternative patriot movement kind of media movement. But yeah, man. I mean, 9/11. It's really hard to wake people up who aren't already open-minded about it. And I think that's no matter what you show them. Like even if you show them something that's bulletproof, it's in a lot of ways it's still too soon. And then it sounds weird saying that 12, 13 years later, but like I really think it is. It's sort of still ingrained into us, that emotional trauma, and I think time will win out. That's what I really think, is that
you don't think it's going to be like the JFK thing, where it's like everybody's just going to know that there's some fuckery with it, but there's never really going to be anybody getting in trouble for it, or anybody really becoming the face of like what really happened or whatever. It's just one of those things. We all just agree that something didn't seem right, and something the official story doesn't make sense, but nothing ever comes out from it. Or do you think that there's, in this case, maybe somebody will end up being like, somebody will get in trouble for it, and it'll be more than just like this, this, I don't know how to put it, but it's just like the JFK thing is like, it's a weird thing, because it's like we all, most of us will agree that the official story doesn't make sense, but yet it's just one of those things, we accepted it and then we move on. Like I don't want 9/11 to become that. I don't want 9/11 to be like, yeah, no, we all agree that, yeah, that doesn't make sense, but then we move on. It's like I want people to realize what it means, and how important it is that we don't accept that, so it doesn't happen again.
Well, I think here's an analogy with the way the JFK movement sort of progressed and the way the 9/11 truth movement did, is I think that what Jim Garrison did, arguably he was one of the first ones to really start the whole JFK conspiracy culture. What he did by actually pointing fingers and naming names, trying to, God, what was the other guy's name? David Ferry, is that the guy's name?
Yeah.
So trying to get him and Clay Shaw implicated for the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and trying to build a case against these individuals, I think was amazing what he was able to do. I mean, even though that Clay Shaw was deemed innocent by the jury, I still think that was that was literally the closest we've ever gotten to uncovering the JFK conspiracy, period. I mean, nothing that's come out after that, I think, has even gotten close.
Well, Garrison was like the real deal. Like, people look at him like he was like he was like this lunatic, and it's like, and he was just this conspiracy theorist. If you look at his research, he has like a lot of evidence. Not, I wouldn't say I don't know what to call it, but a lot of things that didn't make sense that he uncovered. And it's and I think that his investigation doesn't get enough credit, you know. And
well, I mean, it all comes. I mean, most of it comes from him. And the analogy I was going to make is that think about the difference between what he did and what 9/11 truthers are so focused on now. 9/11 truthers are not really even naming names anymore. They're just naming buildings. You know, I mean, if you think about it that way, I don't think that's going to get us any closer necessarily to having someone sitting in a jail cell or facing a trial. And I think that there's other research being done that a lot of people in the 9/11 truth movement scoff at or say is limited hangout stuff that's actually finding what I would describe as fracture points where the 9/11 official story disintegrates at these certain key points. So for example, when you always hear about how the NSA refused to give information to the FBI or the CIA about monitoring bin Laden and his telephone calls, where is the fracture point in that of who failed to pass that information on? Who is that person? Why didn't they pass it on? We still don't know a lot of those details. But with the research of people like Ray Nowalski, the guy who made 9/11 Press for Truth, Kevin Fenton wrote an excellent book called Disconnecting the Dots. What these guys have tried to do is they've tried to literally trace back, like, not just the paper trail, but the information trail, and actually find out who were these individuals that allegedly dropped the ball or just decided to hide information that could have prevented the 9/11 attacks. And these people are extremely obscure. I mean, most people out there who are aware of 9/11 truth probably haven't even heard any of their names. And I think that is a really important area that's getting ignored by sort of a large swath of the 9/11 movement that is just only talking about Building 7 and hoping that by having architects and engineers talk about Building 7 repeatedly, that somehow that's going to get us closer to implicating, you know, whoever the real perpetrators were. I don't know if that's going to happen unless we have some kind of smoking gun, something. So I think, I don't know. Going back to Jim Garrison trying to find out who these people were, and, you know, going after people like Clay Shaw, even when he didn't have any proof that Clay Shaw was a CIA agent. I mean, he went out on a limb with that. And then it was admitted much later, I think sometime in like the late 70s, that Clay Shaw was indeed a CIA agent. I mean, so I would like to see the 9/11 truth movement doing more things like what Kevin Ryan did with Another 19. You know, more films like 9/11 Press for Truth, more books like Disconnecting the Dots. Graham McQueen just wrote this excellent book on the anthrax attacks, where he goes through every single point of the anthrax attacks. I mean, the research he did is amazing for this book, and he goes through every aspect of it and finds all these things that just do not add up. I mean, things that I didn't even put in my film that just that are just mind blowing. Like for example, one of the guys who died from the anthrax, Robert Stevens, his surviving family tried to sue the U.S. government for negligence after the U.S. government claimed it was this lone nut, Bruce Ivins, who sent the anthrax. So the Stevens family was like, well, that's government negligence that the government allowed an employee to send out anthrax and kill people, right? I mean, that was sort of their lawsuit. So they brought this lawsuit to the American government, and I guess in a weird, in a weird sort of backhanded way, the U.S. government defense attorneys used holes in the Bruce Ivins case to settle for a really low amount in court. So in other words, they used the flimsy evidence, examples of Bruce Ivins being behind anthrax against the person trying to bring the lawsuit. So they were actually using evidence that Bruce Ivins couldn't be proved. They couldn't prove that he was behind the attacks. Therefore, the government wasn't negligent, which is amazing to me because the government and the FBI went on television and told the entire media that Bruce Ivins was the sole culprit. Here's our proof. Here's our case. Oh, by the way, he's dead, so he can't defend himself, but he's guilty. And yet, when they get sued for negligence for letting Bruce Ivins send people anthrax, they say, oh, guess what? Actually, this case against Bruce Ivins isn't very strong, so you can't sue us for negligence. I mean, it's amazing.
Crazy.
It is crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
That's insane. That's nuts. Like, that's fucking crazy that, like you said, they blame somebody and then afterwards say, oh, but actually our evidence isn't that good when it suits them and to basically get out of the that's fucking nuts, man. And Another 19 is a really good book. I haven't read it, but I've seen interviews with I think Chris Ryan, or what's his name, Kevin Ryan, and I've seen interviews with him talk about it, and I'm not much of a reader, so I don't read many books, but it's really interesting. Like you said, he hits on the names that aren't so known. He doesn't focus on the Dick Cheneys and the Bush and all that stuff, and he focuses on the names we might not know, and all the links behind closed doors, with people who benefited from it and all that stuff, and I believe he was on James Corbett's show and a couple other shows. So that's one of those books that when you start talking about 9/11, that's one of the books that you don't hear enough talk about, and people should recommend and really focus on, because it's not, like you said, you grouped it in with the Press for Truth and all that stuff, where it's not a conspiracy theory. These are actually what happened, and people who things that actually occurred, and isn't, oh, we think that the planes were drones, or we think that it was Nikola Tesla technology, lasers that brought down the towers and stuff like that. But it's actual facts, and I think that's important, because I think that's a good way of getting through to people. Another great way of getting through to people is the way that Loose Change. I don't know if they all had it, but I know Final Cut had it, and the way that 9/11, the new Pearl Harbor, basically started talking about it, was basically showing people that if they did let it happen, it's not the first time in history they let something like this happen. And I think that's important, because I think that once you realize that, holy shit, it did happen before, why couldn't it happen now? And I think that 9/11 alone, when you talk about that subject alone, it's harder to digest. But when you look at history and you look at everything from Hitler using tactics of what was it, when a Polish they dressed somebody up in a Polish military and said that he burned down a radio station or whatever, or the Parliament House or whatever it was, and blamed it on the Polish and all this stuff. Like, these type of false flag events have happened in the past, and obviously the Gulf of Tonkin and all that stuff. That's the real common one you hear people talk about. But when you start from there and you work your way up to 9/11, I think it's easier for people to realize, like, holy shit, it happened then, why couldn't it happen now? And so I think that what you're saying is like hitting it at all these other angles, instead of just like trying to get people to digest this one piece of evidence, or what you think might be a strong piece of evidence, and them not digesting it. It might not work. Maybe it is important to look at it from different angles, hitting it from different angles, and opening people's eyes to other things. Have you heard about the architects and engineers, the thing they did in Times Square, where that's pretty fucking crazy. For people who don't know, they basically rented out a big screen in Times Square, and they're showing Building 7 collapse, which I'm guessing couldn't be cheap, and I think is gonna open a lot of. I met a guy who's from New York, not the city, from the state, but still he had family members that were in the city, and I brought it up to him, and I talked about, he's actually an engineer, and I brought up to him what the architects and engineer were doing, and he's like, well, what happened with Building 7? I'm like, wait, you're from New York, you're an engineer, and you don't know about Building 7? So like, some people might think, oh, well, there's a lot of people who know about it, it's a waste of time or money or effort. But holy shit, there's still a lot of people who don't know anything about Building 7, even in 2014. So it's I think they might open a lot of eyes doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make a small correction. So when I mentioned all those different things in conjunction with each other, like Another 19 and disconnecting the dots, I think that, like Kevin Fenton and the guy who made 9/11 Press for Truth, they would probably take issue with being lumped in with something like Another 19, because while Another 19, the similarity I think between those is that these people are looking at areas of 9/11 that haven't necessarily been heavily explored yet, and they're covering a lot of territory within those areas. But what Kevin Ryan does is he goes into it with the pre-assumption that the buildings were probably controlled demolition. And from there, he sort of goes into, these are the people that might have been involved. I mean, he is taking a pretty far leap, compared to some of these other people I mentioned. But for me, I find that kind of work equally important for different reasons, because, even though some of his conclusions may be more, or he's taking more risks by making claims that, may be more extreme, he might be hitting on and landing on some stuff and hitting bullseyes along the way that these other people wouldn't have been able to hit because they were too afraid or just weren't willing to go that far. So it is kind of a risky thing that he did with Another 19. I mean, and let's say even more risky if any of these 19 people actually were behind it. I mean, it's a pretty ballsy thing he did, calling out, these people that may have been involved in some way. And Kevin Ryan has done some great work on anthrax as well over the years. But when it comes to controlled demolition stuff, I have a hard time expressing this, because I do think Building 7 was probably demolished. I mean, it's hard for me not to believe that from everything that I've seen. But at the same time, I don't know if, strategically speaking, Building 7 is the best thing that we have. And it seems like sort of the architects and engineers and the people who are primarily steering sort of what's left of the movement now do think that that's our best card, or our best ace in the hole. And as a result, I feel like a lot of people in the movement have gotten too lockstep, too dogmatic, where that if you don't talk about Building 7 enough, for example, I mean, this is something I get trolled for more often than most other things online, where people have already written me off as some kind of government agent or shill simply because I just don't talk about the buildings very much. But the way I see it is, I'm strategically choosing to talk about things that I think will work better. Maybe not at first, but maybe like over time, these things might spread and get picked up. But like, there are plenty of other people in the movement, including, money being paid for Jumbotron ads showing this stuff. So for me, that territory has already been very well covered. It's saturated with people. So when I look into the 9/11 truth movement now, I'm looking more closely at people who are bringing something new to the table or coming at it from a different angle completely. And I have no problem with them like doing that ad in Times Square. I think it's a great idea. But when you throw someone, it's like throwing someone into the deep end. It's like, it's such a jarring image of Building 7 falling that it almost kind of like breaks your brain if you don't really know much about 9/11 truth or any of that stuff to begin with. It's so jarring that I don't know if it puts someone in a necessarily more useful place to understand what actually happened on 9/11. It definitely wakes them up and gets them to think, wow, wait, do I not know? It kind of makes them to rethink it. But I guess now I think it's more important to actually get people, to make people have a better understanding in the context of that day. So like, I've been like obsessing over the website History Commons lately, just because it's the most comprehensive timeline and database of information about 9/11 anywhere on the internet. And I think a lot of conspiracy, more minded people or truthers tend not to look at it too much, because there are things in there which will show you that the hijackers were real people and that they were all over the United States doing all this crazy shit, attracting quite a lot of attention to themselves, almost a suspicious amount of attention before 9/11. And there's still a lot of people in the movement who are going around saying that the hijackers were fake, or that, they don't exist at all. So I think that those kind of weird dogmatic blind spots, or people who just like refuse to be open-minded about it, is what's part of what's stifling the momentum that the movement could still be having. Is we all need to re-examine, what we know, and really open our minds, and not not be afraid to believe certain aspects of the official story if they are indeed backed up by facts. And all I mean by that is things like, bin Laden being in that tape, or Muhammad Atta actually being a real person who walked around Florida and stuff like that. I mean, you'll still run into truthers to this day who will say things like, you don't really believe any of those, those hijackers are real people, do you? And I'll be like, well, yeah, actually they were real people. Here's a bunch of people who saw them at strip clubs and stuff. I mean, so I'm not saying that the people who are pushing the Building 7 stuff are like that, but I do think that it's like they need to have more of an informational context, I think, to go along with that. That's my thought on that. And to the people who troll me about it, it's like, why does everybody have to be talking about the same thing? I mean, don't you think that that's actually probably bad if we're all on the same page? I mean, then it just makes the mainstream media look at us and be like, oh yeah, these guys are just truthers who all think, the buildings are blown up and no plane hit the Pentagon and all this crap. I mean, to me, the best truthers are the ones that can't be pinned down like that. I mean, they're the people who are doing really original work and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's the end of my rant on that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're an agent because you suspiciously went to the bathroom too many times.
Yeah.
So you work for the FBI or CIA. I don't trust you, but yeah. Well, I definitely agree. I think somebody like you or me who probably have done a lot of research on September 11th and have read a lot of articles and watched a lot of documentaries. I think it is intriguing for us to see somebody who's focusing on not the same old, I guess point, So I think that for us, but I think that for some people probably it isn't as, that information isn't as fresh to them or isn't as I guess beaten in them like it is to us. Like the Building 7 obviously is one of the first piece of evidence that probably changed your opinion and changed my opinion on what happened. But I think that there are people out there, unfortunately, who still, this is new information to them and they don't know anything about it, which is pretty crazy. And the other thing is, I think that because so much of what we tend to believe, you look at like when somebody goes from the extreme of thinking like, okay, September 11th happened exactly the way they said, and then all of a sudden they research it and find out like, holy shit, like there's all these holes in the story. Like, wait, if you're telling me that NORAD just fucked up and that we have some of the we have the most defense spending in the world, but yet we can't find some planes that were in the air in hours. And yet, if we didn't find them, nobody got fired, nobody got demoted, nobody got in trouble. So the U.S. government is saying, no, we just fucked up. That's how we let this happen. But yet, nobody got in trouble. Like, so the fact that somebody's opinion on what happened completely changes from, okay, I believe the official story, to like, holy shit, now I'm getting all this information and now I don't believe anything. I think that's why sometimes people can go to the extreme of it where it's like, well, now I don't believe anything. Now it's like my whole world just turned upside down. And that's where sometimes I wonder, I'm like, I wonder if that's what's kind of provoking people to say, well, bin Laden's not a real person and this person's not real and that didn't really happen. Like, it's like, wait, did you go too far to the other side where like now you don't believe anything? And like you said, I think it doesn't do anybody any good. Like, let's focus on the things that we that are more important, in the sense that one, it can be more proved, and two, I think is easier for other people to digest, and seems like it has more evidence to prove it, instead of focusing all this energy on trying to get people to believe something that might not have a whole lot of evidence on. And if we just keep trying to, and the thing is, there's so many different angles that people go at September 11th. I mean, there's a lot of people who believe the official story isn't what happened, but there's a lot of people who have different points of views on what actually did happen. So when we all start turning on against each other, then what are we doing to the movement? So I think that can be bad too, and I think that's one of the points you're making.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you just nailed it. It's when people and when people go too far, it becomes a problem. And the Building 7 thing, I think, is a good example of it, because it really does break your brain to a certain extent to see something that shocking and jarring and that paradigm shifting. So I think that by itself, it's very, very powerful, but you kind of have to have other things to hold on to, some other things around you and some other research to go along with that. So I think that
You think
You know,
it alone would? You think it alone would scare people off because it's just too traumatizing,
no, not necessarily scare people off, but
or turn
would
people off?
not even turn people off, but could open you up to go down that endless rabbit hole of everything is fake. You know, nothing is real. And I think that all I'm saying is I think that it needs to be in conjunction with other stuff. So like showing someone a building, building 7 falling on its own as the end all way to get people introduced to 9/11, I think is strategically misguided because of what we're talking about here. There is a genuine danger in trying to deliver this type of information to people that they will slip too far into the other direction. And I think that that's simply because of a lack of context or a wider variety of sort of research presented along with something like Building 7 falling. And I don't know, I mean, we could talk about that all day, but like there's so many other things about 9/11 that I never hear people talk about that shock me, maybe not just as much as Building 7, but that shock me a lot, that I never hear people say. Like, I'm going to do an episode about 9/11 for Media Roots fairly soon. That's pretty much just about the first year of the Bush presidency, and what happened before 9/11 during his time in office. And I was shocked at how many times Muhammad Atta attracted attention to himself, for example. I mean, he got a warrant out for his arrest because he refused to pay a ticket for not having his driver's license when he got caught for speeding one time. I mean, he went into a Department of Agriculture office and asked for a loan for a crop duster to do a biological terrorist attack with. I mean, things like this are just unbelievable to me. How would someone planning this secret operation, this ringleader of these 19 hijackers, why would he want to attract so much attention to himself unless that was his purpose? So that when you go back and look at what they were doing, you could see all these times when these people were sticking out like a sore thumb. I mean, you go back to Moussaoui, the guy who was caught taking flying lessons in August. The only reason that he was in jail, that he got thrown in jail, was because the flight school itself found his behavior so suspicious and alarming that they called the authorities on him. And when they did that, he had an immigration violation, so then they immediately arrested him for that. But it's like, when you read things like that, it's incredible to think that, it seems in a lot of ways there was a script being run, and that these people might not have actually been, who we think they are, that they were, it reminds me a lot of like the multiple Oswalds and stuff that were running around during the JFK time where, Oswald made a big public spectacle out of himself by passing out communist leaflets in a heavy Cuban area of Florida, I think it was, or maybe it wasn't Florida, maybe it was Louisiana. And he went on TV and did like a debate with some guy, saying that he was like a communist and stuff. I mean, right before he was implicated in the assassination.
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, there's so many different things about 9/11. I mean, and I just did this episode about Bill Clinton's involvement in the war on setting up the war on terror. And there were just so many things that I learned from researching that flipped my paradigm upside down of sort of, I come from more of a Democrat family, more, generic liberal persuasion. So I was sort of, I hated Bush, because a lot of other people hated him too. We were sort of taught to hate Bush so strongly for what he was doing, as if he was sort of the sole culprit. Like he came in, took all this executive power and just ramped it up all the way beyond anything any other president had done. But when you go back and look at what Clinton was doing, surprisingly similar in a lot of ways to the things that George Bush was trying to do later. I mean, Bill Clinton was trying to enhance the laws here so that we could actually execute people for things that weren't like drug crimes and stuff, and under this guise of terrorism prevention. He even what else did Bill Clinton do? I mean, there's some crazy things that he did. Oh yeah, Richard Clark and Al Gore and Bill Clinton all were complicit in renditioning torture suspects, against the Geneva Conventions. They were kidnapping. Sorry, did I say torture suspects? I meant terrorism suspects. They were kidnapping terrorism suspects in other countries and bringing them, into other countries to get interrogated and tortured and things like that. So, I don't know. I mean, it's just all the same shit, I mean, I'm seeing less of a difference now between these different administrations than I was even before, after I did this. And I think once Clinton set up this framework and this machinery for a war on terror, something like 9/11 was inevitable. Someone in the national security apparatus, people's movements started being made, things started to shift, and someone created this perfect situation to essentially fill this void of no Cold War, or, the lack of a Soviet Union as an enemy. And 9/11 was the perfect thing. And I think that regardless of who was behind it, it was an inevitability for the simple fact that we were poising our entire machinery for this new war, Even before 9/11, I mean, when bin Laden was supposedly behind just these embassy bombings and stuff, I mean, there were major movements already being made here that this is going to be the next battlefield. I mean, they're even using words like battle space, sort of implying that it wasn't just, one theater war or one location. It was like the whole world was going to be this battlefield.
Yeah, I think the Bill Clinton thing's interesting because I was kind of the same way. I grew up in like the first political party I kind of attached myself to was the Democratic political party, because I agree with the social issues. I kind of like the fact that they seem more likable. Like it had these old religious, rich corporate guys, Republicans, and then they had these what they seem to be pretty. What they're fighting for just seemed to be good things, what the liberals were fighting for, just for, people who, pro-choice and their views on racism and gays and all this stuff. Everything just seemed, it just seemed like it was an easy choice for me to pick. And I think you're right. I think the one thing that's going to come out of the Obama and the Bush administration is that I think the long effect, the long-term effect of it is going to be to have two awful presidents and possibly two of the worst presidents in American history right after each other is going to change people's perspectives on political parties. Because I think if there was at least like somebody who slipped in between the two, but because they're right after each other and yet they're identical with policies and they're identical with how bad they sucked, I think it's changing people's opinions on the political parties. I think it's really going to have a long-term effect on like, holy shit, we had a Republican, now we have a Democrat, and nothing changed. And I think that the long-term effect is going to be hopefully that people are going to finally look at a third party, like a libertarian or a progressive. I think libertarians and progressive, even though they're both very different in certain detailed views, I think that they're both, the good thing is that they both have a lot of positive things, and they're looking at things a little differently than the political parties they're usually grouped in with. And so I think that, hopefully the long-term effect is that independents going to be able to get into debate. Well, people don't realize, like, it's almost impossible. It is impossible for a third party to get in these debates. RT hosted a debate with alternative parties, I guess, for lack of a better term, and it was way better than the Democratic and Republican debate, which is a joke when they already know the questions are going to be asked, and they already know, they already in their head they've already worked through what answers they're going to give. I mean, the fact that they still suck sometimes, they still don't know how to answer questions or get stumped is amazing, because I'm like, these guys are fucking robots. They're just saying the same things, and every debate and every single lecture is exactly the same, and it's just like, these guys aren't people. They can't relate to us. I mean, they're so detached from the regular person who has to work a full-time job and is struggling. And I mean, we're the first generation that, like, our kids or possibly aren't going to have a better savings account than our parents, or possibly going to have a better job than our parents, or possibly going to have a better life than our parents. Like it's scary to think that like every generation was progressing until now, and now we have a bunch of kids who are in debt, can't find a job, and income equality is insane, and yet we don't export shit. I mean, we export the Kardashians. I mean, what do we export? Culture. I mean, we don't export anything. So it's like, where do we go from here? It's like I hope that I just released a song, War for Peace. It was actually an old song that I redid and I thought had more potential. And one of the themes of the song is this idea of like not so much a revolution of physical revolution, but a revolution of minds and a revolution of ideas and a revolution. And I think that we need one, and being Portuguese, I always was intrigued with Portuguese history, and they had a revolution with Salazar was a dictator, and they basically took him down without ever one person dying, without ever one bullet ever being fired. And I think it's a great example that a revolution can happen without it having to have violence and bloodshed and stuff like that, and I hope that we're going in that direction. So I don't know, your thoughts, I guess.
I mean, I think that the difference between the United States has never existed before in any empire, is that we are so controlled by these corporations that they'll do everything in their power to make us feel like we're free. I mean, they'll do that, and they'll incrementally, ratchet up sort of the totalitarianism just ever so slightly that we'll get used to it. Like the whole proverbial boiled frogs scenario. I mean, look at what Facebook did recently. Everybody's so shocked that Facebook is making people now, I guess, use their legal names. But I mean, is that really that much of a surprise? I mean, we knew that this is basically just, maybe not the government's direct intelligence collecting apparatus, but it's like corporate intelligence. They're collecting intelligence on us for the purpose of just making more money off of us and trying to predict our behavior. So I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of harmfulness in companies like Google and Facebook. And if a revolution started here, it would be kind of like almost like the East German Stasi. I'm writing this article right now for a magazine called White Fungus, and it's all about the Stasi and sort of like what kind of totalitarian system they lived under. And one of the main things they would do is they would only resort to like killing people and imprisoning people as a last resort. So what they would mainly focus on was trying to steer people away from dissenting. And they would do it in all these different ways by having informants in people's places of work, having informants in people's families, so that if somebody started talking about wanting to defect to the West, hopefully there'd be an informant nearby or a Stasi associate who would try to steer that person away from doing that. Either by arguing with them or trying to convince them to stay, or even by making it economically harder for them to be able to travel outside of the country, things like that. So there was a lot of subtle manipulative ways that the Stasi would use. And keep in mind, this was, the Stasi only existed until the late 80s. So their computer technology and their surveillance capabilities were very primitive compared to what we have now. So what really freaks me out now and what makes me paranoid about the idea of the revolution of the mind is that Google is one step ahead of us. I mean, just Google alone, not even factoring in the NSA, Google has an immense amount of power about how we conduct ourselves. The amount of people who use Gmail, the fact that they're already scanning all of our Gmails for keywords, these kind of things are incredibly an incredible insight onto someone's behavior and their state of mind, and even your search history, which Google keeps a record of. I mean, the government and even a company like Google would be able to predict a mile away that a revolution was brewing and was going to happen in this country. So that's the part that creeps me out, is what will these corporations and the government do to manipulate and to steer us away from those type of tendencies, you know? And I feel like they're already doing it now. Maybe a revolution, a really powerful revolution, isn't necessarily brewing and about to explode now, but I think that the signs and the signposts are already there that people are very uncontent about the state of things, and that people are just going to become less content over time. And yeah, it's really problematic when you have a corporation that has so much intelligence already gathered on us, and that is also working with the U.S. government. I mean, maybe the U.S. government, doesn't have the time to look into all this stuff. But when, I don't know, I mean, Google, I don't know what their priorities are really, but they're just going to make more money by studying us more, as customers or commodities. I mean, we are the commodity to them. That's why Google services are quote unquote free. It's not really free. We're like the battery, for them. It's like the Matrix kind of. It's like they're using our life energy, our personalities, our interests, our likes, our dislikes to essentially make money.
Yeah, we all became a number. We all became a statistic. We all became. I mean, all that information is useful information for marketing. I mean, you look at it. Yeah. Corporations spend tons of money on trying to understand, who they're targeting and how to get to them or how to get them to their product, and that's all that information is. That's why, obviously something's going on, because Google is one of the biggest companies in the world, but yet their service is free. So obviously people have to look at, okay, well, how are they making money, and obviously the links, obviously the government, I'm sure if they want information, what better way than, getting it through Google and so it is scary when a company gets that big and you wonder, and we all do become numbers, you look at it, I could just imagine the business CEO meetings with some of these big corporations and just looking at statistics, and it's just like that's us. We're just a statistic. What makes us go, what doesn't make us go. I mean, that movie, The Corporation's a really good documentary about just basically how corporations can manipulate what you want and what you what you like and all these things, and it's way more intricate than just, okay, we think kids like clowns, so let's throw a clown on TV. There's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more thought that goes to it, and that's an old documentary from like the early 2000s, which was really good because it's one of the first ones that really changed my perspectives on things, and so it just absolutely, man. And another one, a good documentary. If people want to watch something on Netflix, it's Terms and Conditions May Apply, and that's another really good one about all the shit we're fucking clicking agree to and all that stuff. So it's it's scary, and then when you do your research, it only gets scarier. That's why people say reality's crazier than fiction, and it really is. And since once you start learning about this stuff, I'm not sure how anybody can read a fictional novel or watch I struggle to watch fictional movies, and just because I know that there's probably a really good, documentary I could be watching that will blow my mind even more, So, so it is crazy, but we've been talking for quite a bit. Thanks, Robbie. I really appreciate it. This has been, I think this is probably my second longest podcast. I haven't timed it. I don't know how long it went, but it's cool because now I'm like, dude, I always wonder how Rogan can do really long podcasts, but I guess when the conversation flow and time flies, and
it certainly does.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it. What's coming up? I mean, you got a article you're writing, you got a Media Roots podcast that you do regularly, which now you're doing some on your own, which is pretty cool, and I'm guessing pretty hard too. No, just to kind of
yeah, I mean, so Abby's been very busy, and it's hard to be able to get to do a podcast with her more than like once a month, and we still do that. So we're still doing our podcast. We just did one about Gitmo. Abby actually got to visit Guantanamo and told a firsthand account story of her experience there that is unlike anything I've ever heard. I mean, it's straight from the heart. Really, there's a lot of swearing, a lot of genuine reactions. It's not like a news documentary about Gitmo. I mean, it's like some seriously real shit. And then so after that, I decided to start my own sort of spin-off from Media Roots, because 9/11, of course, has been an obsession of mine for many years. So I'm doing a sub series. I guess I should call it it's just a spin-off from the regular Media Roots podcast called the 9/11 Bulletin, my first guest was the guy who coined the phrase 9/11 truther. His name is John Gold. He's recently started his own show as well called We Were Lied to on 9/11 that everybody should check out. And then, so coming up, I'm going to continue with the 9/11 bulletin. There's going to be a few episodes coming out of that soon. There's going to be one all about the anthrax attacks where I'm interviewing Graham McQueen, the guy who just wrote this great new anthrax book. And then there's going to be a few episodes about the different, what might be in those 28 pages, who the different foreign actors in 9/11 might have been, speculating about all the different countries, Pakistan, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, of course. So that's coming up soon. And then American Anthrax is going to get polished a little bit more, and I'm going to put that out on DVD. And there's going to be a shitload of bonus features in there. So stay tuned for that to be available soon.
Are you still working on music?
Oh yeah. I'm still working on music. I just got the new Aphex Twin album, so I've been jamming on that for the past few days. Been pretty inspirational.
I love that when you get a new CD, like it motivates you to, and it really, like when it's really good, it motivates you to want to start doing music again. Like if you get in a slump, you just need a really good album to get you, like, I want to pick up the keyboard, or I want to pick up something and record something,
Totally, yeah. And this is Aphex Twin has been probably one of my biggest inspirations to get into music making in the first place. And when I started making music, he kind of semi-retired, and he would kind of dropped off the map for a long time. And so it's been literally 13 years since he released an album under the name Aphex Twin. And so yeah, I feel like I'm like getting all these memories of what sort of got me interested in this in the first place. It's kind of a great time right now for music.
Have you heard Enter Shikari? Have you ever heard of them?
No.
I'm having a singer on Sunday or Tuesday, and you check them out, man. You might like them. It's a combination of like punkish hardcore with like electronic music, like dubstep, tons of just like weird sounds and synths and stuff like that. And I actually first heard about them because they toured with Prodigy in the UK, and they're from the UK, and just to caught my attention because they were mixing keyboards and metal and hardcore before it was really like fashionable and like common like it is today. And but the one thing I really liked about them is they weren't just good, but they're political. They had a lot of just political opinions that kind of were highlighted in their music. And they're actually at Z-Day. They played at I believe they played at one of the Zeitgeist festivals. They're good friends with Ben McLeish, who actually set me up with the interview. And because I met the singer once, like at a show, but this was before I had the podcast. And but I would have asked him to be on. But he really cool. You might enjoy them. They're really good. Architects is another one from the UK. Seems like a lot of really politically driven music comes from like the UK. I don't know if it's because of all the conflict and or what it is, but it seems like there is a lack of like political music in the US, and it seems like it comes from other countries. But yeah, check them out. They're really cool. He's been on London Real recently, not too long ago too. But I highly recommend anybody who's never heard of them. They're really influenced by the Zeitgeist movement. That's another thing I want to talk to you about, because I don't think we've ever really talked about the Zeitgeist movement and just your opinions on that. I want to talk to you about that and the United States of secrets and get more into that, because I know you did a full podcast on it, and you really know the names and the facts a lot better than I do. And I wanted to kind of pick at your brain a little bit with that. So those are definitely some things I want to talk about next time. Hopefully, we'll hold our bladder a little better next song. I'm kidding. But the nice thing is we can't edit, so it doesn't matter But
good.
And so yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully, I appreciate the fact that the last time you were on my show, you did a couple shows after mine. Can I get the glory for the fact that maybe other people contact you after my show? Can I give you the ripple effect bump? Was that possible?
Yeah, it created a ripple effect, man.
Is that what happened? Did people contact you after you're on my show? I was actually surprised that you didn't do, like, maybe you did do them and I just didn't run into them. But before my show, I was kind of surprised that, like, I'm like, dude, Robbie does Media Roots. I'm like, he obviously is an interesting dude who knows his shit. Like, how come I'm the, like, one of the few people that thought about, like, getting this guy on the show? I'm like, you know, it was kind of weird that I didn't. Was that a conscious decision that to not do a lot of interviews and then you kind of decided to, or was it just never came up?
No, I think in general, I'm kind of more of a behind the scenes kind of guy. Like I don't, only recently did I started being pretty public on Twitter and stuff. You know, I was on Facebook, but like, I don't really promote myself. I don't really have.
You don't even use your real name in most shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like I already have such a persona out there already about my music, you know, as obscure as I am out there. So like, I don't know. I can't really answer that. I think you were one of the first people who asked me. And I mean, I've been on other people's shows before, but like not anything like your show and having like a really nice, like casual conversation about something. I mean, there's nothing harder than doing like a radio show where you only have like 15 minutes, you know, to talk. But so yeah, this is the first time I've ever done something like this, and
I'm like, even if I don't get credit for it, in the back of my head, I'm just like, maybe I did, you know, but which was one of those things. We opened up the show talking about your sister, you know, how popular she has gotten and all, and that's why I was like, it was even more stunning that I'm like, wait, you don't think that like she probably comes from a really outspoken family? I'm like, you know, I don't know if maybe your mother was really, you know, outspoken and stuff, but I'm like, you know, her brother is. I'm like, obviously, you know, like he's in music. You seem like an interesting dude the first time I heard about you, and I'm just, you know, the first interview, I'm like, he's well spoken, he knows his shit. Like, I'm still, guys like you and Corbett always stun me about how many names and information you store, especially like hearing about how many drugs you did. It's like anybody who thinks that like it makes you dumb, I'm like, wait, you gotta listen to Robbie talk, because I'm like, first let him tell you how many drugs he did, then talk to him about any topic and be amazed by how many names he remembers, you know. It's like, and how much information. I'm like, usually they don't go hand in hand, so I'm like, you're like the perfect piece of evidence that you know, not all drugs make you you know, a retard, you know. It's just it's pretty amazing, you know. So
I like that.
But
I wanted to plug, if anyone wants to go check out my music, we didn't really get a chance to talk. I mean, I don't really have anything new coming out right now, but I have some, you know, some stuff for sale on my website, recordlabelrecords.org. And I'm on Bandcamp, and my band name, well, my solo musical project name is Fluorescent Grey. And that's also my Twitter handle is Fluorescent Grey. So yeah, that's a whole nother world of stuff.
I'll on the video episode that I put on YouTube, like I told you via email, and for anybody who listens to this on their phone or whatever and isn't watching the video, on the YouTube episodes, anybody who does have the capability or want to do the interview via video, I will put a video version of the episodes on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6. And also in the show descriptions, I'll put links to all the guests, all their Twitter, their Facebook, their any of their websites. In this circumstance, I might even put a link to your performance on Breaking the Set. One, it will expose people to you and your music, and like you said, it's probably a side that people don't hear as much from, and I think is pretty cool, and I think anybody who hasn't watched Breaking the Set, it'll expose them to that too. So definitely check that all out. And so if anybody's listening to this and downloading it and doesn't ever go onto YouTube or search for the YouTube video versions of the episodes, check it out, and you know, it's an easy way of, you know, just checking out the links. That way you don't have to Google or search anything. I think people like what's easy, you know. I think people, you know, would rather just click on a link than have to search for stuff. So that's why I kind of put that stuff there. But yeah, so hopefully a lot more to talk about next time. Obviously we have no problem holding a conversation. So yeah, well, and maybe to get into a little bit about music, I'd love to hear about, you know, what your influences were, and any cool shit that you're into now, and you know, the music scene. It's easy to get out of like the loop, you know. Once you stop paying attention to music, like people will bring up some artists that you haven't heard about, and you're like, really? Like, who the fuck? How come I don't know who they are? So it's you know, it'd be cool to talk about music and have a little change of a vibe every once in a while. So
for sure, man.
Hey, thanks, Rob. I really appreciate your time, man. Have a great weekend, and thanks for taking some time on this Friday to hang out and bullshit for a little bit.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot, Ricky. It was great.
Hey, thanks. Take care.
Have a good one.
Another awesome episode of Robbie Martin's. Thanks everybody for listening. I truly appreciate everybody who takes time to listen to this, and please review it, please retweet it, share it, do whatever, subscribe to us on iTunes or Podomatic or Pod Addict, whatever app you use. And I truly appreciate everybody taking the time to listen. At the end of this podcast, you're going to hear War for Peace. It's my new song. It's going to be a lower quality version because I compress all the files and kind of compress the music and stuff just to kind of make the podcast, because some of them do go long like this one, just to not take as much space in your phone. So I figured even though it's a lower quality music on the podcast, you can obviously always find Theory 6 music, the higher quality versions on iTunes and stuff like that. And this song specifically will be on iTunes and Google Play and all the places you can find music, hopefully soon, within a couple weeks and stuff, once I find time to do the whole process. And it takes a little bit of time for it to actually be available. So just bear with me. That song will be released. And but for now, hope you enjoy it. And I'll see you guys next time. I have a bunch of awesome guests coming up, so keep a lookout for it. And thanks again, guys. Peace.
is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow and Exxon. Those are the nations. The world is a college of corporations. The world is a business. truth.